Chapter 9 of The Money Moon. This recording is in the public domain. The Money Moon, a Romance, by Jeffery Farnol. Chapter 9, in which may be found some description of Arcadia, and gooseberries. Anthea, leaning on her rake in a shady corner of the 5-acre field, turned to watch Bellow who, stripped to his shirt sleeves, bare of neck and arm, and pitchfork in hand, was busy tossing up great mounds of sweet-smelling hay to Adam, who stood upon a wagon to receive it, with Small Porges perched up beside him. A week had elapsed since Bellew had found his way to Dappelmir, a week which had only served to strengthen the bonds of affection between him and his nephew, and to win over sharp-eyed, shrewd little Miss Priscilla to the extent of declaring him to be: "First, a gentleman, Anthea, my dear, and secondly, what is much rarer nowadays, a true man." A week, and already he was hail fellow well met with everyone about the place, for who was proof against his unaffected gaiety, his simple, easy, good fellowship? So he laughed, and joked as he swung his pitchfork, awkwardly enough to be sure, and received all hints and directions as to its use, in the kindly spirit they were tendered. And Anthea, watching him from her shady corner, sighed once or twice, and catching herself, so doing, stamped her foot at herself, and pulled her sunbonnet closer about her face. "No, Adam," he was saying, "depend upon it, there is nothing like exercise, and of all exercise, give me a pitchfork." "Why, as to that, Mr. Bellew, sir," Adam retorted, "I say, so be it, so long as I ain't near the wrong end of it, for the way you do 'ave a flourishin' and a whirlin' that theer fork is fair astonishin', I do declare it be." "Why, you see, Adam, there are some born with a leaning towards pitchforks, as there are others born to the pen, and the palette, and things, but for me, Adam, the pitchfork every time," said Bellew, mopping his brow. "If you was to try and 'andle it more as if it was a pitchfork now, Mr. Bellew, sir," suggested Adam, and, not waiting for Bellew's laughing rejoinder, he chirruped to the horses, and the great wagon creaked away with its mountainous load, surmounted by Adam's grinning visage, and Small Porges's golden curls, and followed by the rest of the merry voiced haymakers. Now it was that, turning his head, Bellew espied Anthea watching him, whereupon he shouldered his fork, and, coming to where she sat upon a throne of hay, he sank down at her feet with a luxurious sigh. She had never seen him without a collar before, and now she could not but notice how round, and white, and powerful his neck was, and how the muscles bulged upon arm, and shoulder, and how his hair curled in small, damp rings upon his brow. "It is good," said he, looking up into the witching face above him, "yes, it is very good to see you idle, just for once." "And I was thinking it was good to see you work, just for once." "Work!" he exclaimed, "my dear Miss Anthea, I assure you I have become a positive glutton for work. It has become my earnest desire to plant things, and grow things, and chop things with axes, to mow things with scythes. I dream of pastures, and ploughs, of pails and pitchforks by night, and by day, reaping hooks, hoes, and rakes are in my thoughts continually, which all goes to show the effect of this wonderful air of Arcadia. Indeed, I am as full of suppressed energy these days as Adam is of the old Adam. And, talking of Adam, reminds me that he has solemnly pledged himself to initiate me into the mysteries of swinging a scythe to-morrow morning at 5 o'clock. Yes, indeed, my heart bounds responsive to the swish of a scythe in thick grass, and my soul sits enraptured upon a pitchfork." "How ridiculous you are!" she laughed. "And how perfectly content!" he added. "Is anyone ever quite content?" she sighed, glancing down at him wistful eyed. "Not unless they have found Arcadia," he answered. "Have you, then?" "Yes." He nodded complacently. "Oh yes, I've found it." "Are you sure?" "Oh, quite sure." "Arcadia," she repeated, wrinkling her brows. "What is Arcadia, and where?" "Arcadia," answered Bellew, watching the smoke rise up from his pipe with a dreamy eye, "Arcadia is the Promised Land, the land that everyone tries to find some time or other, and, maybe, anywhere." "And how came you to find it?" "By the most fortunate chance in the world." "Tell me," said Anthea, taking a wisp of hay, and beginning to plait it in dexterous brown fingers. "Tell me how you found it." "Why then, you must know, in the first place," he began in his slow, even voice, "that it is a place I have sought for in all my wanderings, and I have been pretty far afield. But I sought it so long, and so vainly, that I began to think it was like the El Dorado of the old adventurers, and it never existed at all." "Yes," said Anthea, busy with her plaiting. "But, one day, Fate, or Chance, or Destiny, or their benevolent spirit, sent a certain square shouldered waggoner to show me the way, and, after him, a very Small Porges, bless him, to lead me into this wonderful Arcadia." "Oh, I see," nodded Anthea, very intent upon her plaiting. "But there is something more," said Bellew. "Oh?" said Anthea. "Shall I tell you?" "If it is very interesting." "Well then, in this delightful land there is a castle, grim, embattled, and very strong." "A castle?" said Anthea, glancing up suddenly. "The castle of Heart's Desire." "Oh!" said she, and gave all her attention to her plaiting again. "And so," continued Bellew, "I am waiting, very patiently, until, in her own good time, she who rules within, shall open the gate to me, or bid me go away." Into Bellew's voice had crept a thrill no one had ever heard before. He leaned nearer to her, and his dreamy eyes were keen now, and eager. And she, though she saw nothing of all this, yet, being a woman, knew it was there, of course, and, for that very reason, looked resolutely away. Wherefore, once again, Bellew heartily wished that sunbonnets had never been invented. So there was silence, while Anthea stared away across the golden cornfields, yet saw nothing of them, and Bellew looked upon those slender, capable fingers that had faltered in their plaiting, and stopped. And thus, upon the silence, there broke a sudden voice shrill with interest. "Go on, Uncle Porges, what about the dragons? Oh, please go on, there's always dragons in enchanted castles, you know, to guard the lovely Princess. Aren't you going to have any dragons that hiss, you know, and spit out smoke and flames? Oh, do please have a dragon!" And Small Porges appeared from the other side of the haymow, flushed and eager. "Certainly, my Porges," nodded Bellew, drawing the small figure down beside him. "I was forgetting the dragons, but there they are, with scaly backs, and iron claws, spitting out sparks and flames, just as self-respecting dragons should, and roaring away like thunder." "Ah!" exclaimed Small Porges, nestling closer to Bellew, and reaching out a hand to Auntie Anthea, "that's fine! Let's have plenty of dragons." "Do you think a dozen would be enough, my Porges?" "Oh yes, but suppose the beautiful Princess didn't open the door? What would you do if you were really a wandering knight who was waiting patiently for it to open? What would you do then?" "Shin up a tree, my Porges." "Oh, but that wouldn't be a bit right, would it, Auntie?" "Of course not," laughed Anthea, "it would be most unknightlike, and very undignified." "'Sides," added Small Porges, "you couldn't climb up a tree in your armour, you know." "Then I'd make an awful good try at it," nodded Bellew. "No," said Small Porges, shaking his head.
"Shall I tell you what you ought to do?" "Well then, you draw your two-edged sword, and dress your shield, like Gareth the kitchen knave did. He was always dressing his shield, and so was Lancelot. And you'd fight all those dragons, and kill 'em, and cut their heads off."
"And then what would happen?" inquired Bellew.
"Why then the lovely princess would open the gate, and marry you, of course, and live happily ever after, and all would be revelry and joy."
"Ah!" sighed Bellew, "if she'd do that, I think I'd fight all the dragons that ever roared, and kill them too. But supposing she, wouldn't open the gate?"
"Why then," said Small Porges, wrinkling his brow, "why then, you'd have to storm the castle, of course, and break open the gate, and run off with the princess on your charger, if she was very beautiful, you know."
"A most excellent idea, my Porges. If I should happen to find myself in like circumstances, I'll surely take your advice." Now, as he spoke, Bellew glanced at Anthea, and she at him, and straightway she blushed, and then she laughed, and then she blushed again, and still blushing, rose to her feet, and turned to find Mr. Cassilis within a yard of them.
"Ah, Miss Anthea,"
said he, lifting his hat,
"I sent Georgy to find you, but it seems he forgot to mention that I was waiting."
"I'm awful sorry, Mr. Cassilis, but Uncle Porges was telling us about dragons, you know."
Small Porges hastened to explain.
"Dragons!"
repeated Mr. Cassilis, with his supercilious smile.
"Ah, indeed, dragons should be interesting, especially in such a very quiet, shady nook as this. Quite an idyllic place for story telling. It's a positive shame to disturb you."
And his sharp white teeth gleamed beneath his moustache as he spoke, and he tapped his riding boot lightly with his hunting crop, as he fronted Bellew, who had risen, and stood bare-armed, leaning upon his pitchfork, and, as in their first meeting, there was a mute antagonism in their look.
"Let me introduce you to each other,"
said Anthea, conscious of this attitude.
"Mr. Cassilis of Brampton Court,
Mr. Bellew." "Of nowhere in particular, sir," added Bellew.
"And pray,"
said Mr. Cassilis perfunctorily, as they strolled on across the meadow,
"how do you like Dappelmir, Mr. Bellew?"
"Immensely, sir, beyond all expression."
"Yes, it is considered rather pretty, I believe."
"Lovely, sir," nodded Bellew, "though it is not so much the beauty of the place itself that appeals to me so much as what it contains."
"Oh, indeed!"
said Mr. Cassilis, with a sudden sharp glance.
"To what do you refer?"
"Gooseberries, sir."
"I, beg your pardon?"
"Sir," said Bellew gravely, "all my life I have fostered a secret passion for gooseberries. Raw, or cooked, in pie, pudding, or jam, they are equally alluring. Unhappily, the American gooseberry is but a hollow mockery, at best."
"Ha?"
said Mr. Cassilis, dubiously. "Now, in gooseberries, as in everything else, sir, there is to be found the superlative, the quintessence, the ideal. Consequently, I have roamed east and west, and north and south in quest of it."
"Really?"
said Mr. Cassilis, stifling a yawn, and turning towards Miss Anthea with the very slightest shrug of his shoulders. "And in Dappelmir," concluded Bellew, solemnly, "I have, at last, found my ideal." "Gooseberry!" added Anthea with a laugh in her eyes. "Arcadia being a land of ideals," nodded Bellew.
"Ideals," said
Mr. Cassilis, caressing his moustache.
"Ideals, and, gooseberries, though probably excellent things in themselves, are apt to pall upon one in time. Personally, I find them equally insipid."
"Of course, it is all a matter of taste," sighed Bellew.
"But,"
Mr. Cassilis went on, fairly turning his back upon him,
"the subject I wished to discuss with you, Miss Anthea, was the, approaching sale."
"The sale,"
she repeated, all the brightness dying out of her face.
I wished,"
said Cassilis, leaning nearer to her, and lowering his voice confidentially,
"to try to convince you how unnecessary it would be, if—"
and he paused significantly. Anthea turned quickly aside, as though to hide her mortification from Bellew's keen eyes, whereupon he, seeing it all, became straightway more dreamy than ever, and, laying a hand upon Small Porges' shoulder, pointed with his pitchfork to where, at the other end of the 5 acre, the haymakers worked away as merrily as ever. "Come, my Porges," said he, "let us away, and join yon happy throng, and, with Daphnis, and Clo, and Blowsabel, we'll list to the, cuckoo in the dell." So, hand in hand, the 2 Porges set off together, but when they had gone some distance, Bellew looked back, and then he saw that Anthea walked with her head averted, yet Cassilis walked close beside her, and stooped now and then, until the black moustache came very near the curl, that curl of wanton witchery that peeped above her ear.
"Uncle Porges, why do you frown so?"
"Frown, my Porges? Did I? Well, I was thinking."
"Well, I'm thinking too, only I don't frown, you know, but I'm thinking just the same."
"And what might you be thinking, nephew?"
"Why, I was thinking that although you're so awful fond of gooseberries, and though there's lots of ripe ones on the bushes, I've never seen you eat a single one."
End of chapter 9. Honeymoon. This recording is in the public domain. The Money Moon, a Romance, by Jeffery Farnol. Chapter 10. How Bellew and Adam entered into a solemn league and covenant.
"Look at the moon to night, Uncle Porges."
"I see it."
"It's awful big and round, isn't it?"
"Yes, it's very big, and very round."
"And rather yellow, isn't it?"
"Very yellow."
"Just like a great, big, golden sovereign, isn't it?"
"Very much like a sovereign, my Porges."
"Well, do you know, I was wondering if there was any chance that it was a money moon?"
They were leaning out at the lattice, Small Porges and Big Porges. Anthea and Miss Priscilla were busied upon household matters wholly feminine, wherefore Small Porges had drawn Bellew to the window, and there they leaned, the small body enfolded by Bellew's long arm, and the 2 faces turned up to the silvery splendor of the moon. But now, Anthea came up behind them, and, not noticing the position of Bellew's arm as she leaned on the other side of Small Porges, it befell that her hand touched, and, for a moment, rested upon Bellew's hand, hidden as it was in the shadow. And this, probably, began it. The air of Arcadia, as has been said before, is an intoxicating air, but it is more. It is an air charged with a subtle magic whereby the commonest objects, losing their prosaic, matter of fact shapes, become transfigured into things of wonder and delight, little things that pass as mere ordinary commonplaces, things insignificant, and wholly beneath notice in the everyday world, become fraught with such infinite meaning, and may hold such sublime, such undreamed of possibilities, here in Arcadia. Thus, when it is recorded that Anthea's hand accidentally touched, and rested upon Bellew's, the significance of it will become at once apparent.
"And pray,"
said Anthea, laying that same hand in the most natural manner in the world, upon the Small Porges' curls,
"pray, what might you 2 be discussing so very solemnly?" "The moon," answered Small Porges. "I was wondering if it was a money moon, and Uncle Porges hasn't said if it is yet."
"Why no, old chap," answered Bellew, "I'm afraid not."
"And pray," said Anthea again, "what might a money moon be?" "Well," explained Small Porges, "when the moon's just so, then you go out, and find a fortune, you know. But the moon's got to be a money moon, and you've got to know, you know, else you'll find nothing, of course."
"Ah, Georgy dear!" sighed Anthea, stooping her dark head down to his golden curls.
"Don't you know that fortunes are very hard to get, and that they have to be worked for, and that no one ever found one without a great deal of labor, and sorrow?" "'Course, every one can't find fortunes, Auntie Anthea, I know that, but we shall. My Uncle Porges knows all about it, you see, and I know that we shall. I'm sure as sure we shall find one some day, 'cause, you see, I put it in my prayers now. At the end, you know, I say, 'And please help me and my Uncle Porges to find a fortune when the Money Moon comes, a big one, world without end, Amen.' So you see, it's all right, and we're just waiting till the Money Moon comes, aren't we, Uncle Porges?"
"Yes, old chap, yes," nodded Bellew, "until the Money Moon comes." And so there fell a silence between them, yet a silence that held a wondrous charm of its own, a silence that lasted so long that the coppery curls drooped lower, and lower upon Bellew's arm, until Anthea, sighing, rose, and in a very tender voice bade Small Porges say good night, the which he did, forthwith, slumberous of voice, and sleepy eyed, and so, with his hand in Anthea's, went drowsily up to bed. Wherefore, seeing that Miss Priscilla had bustled away into the kitchen, Bellew sauntered out into the rose garden to look upon the beauty of the night. The warm air was fragrant with dewy scents, and the moon, already high above the tree tops, poured down their gentle radiance upon the quaint, old garden with its winding walks, and clipped yew hedges, while upon the quiet, from the dim shadow of the distant woods, stole the soft, sweet song of a nightingale. Bellew walked a path bordered with flowers, and chequered with silver patches of moonlight, drinking in the thousand beauties about him, staring up at the glory of the moon, the indigo of the sky, and listening to the voice of the lonely singer in the wood. And yet it was of none of these he was thinking as he paused under the shadow of King Arthur, nor of Small Porges, nor of any one or anything in this world, but only of the sudden, light touch of a warm, soft hand upon his. "Be that you, sir?" Bellew started, and now he found that he had been sitting, all this while, with an empty pipe between his teeth, yet content therewith, wherefore he shook his head, and wondered. "Be that you, Mr. Bellew, sir?" "Yes, Adam, it is I."
"Ah! and how might ye be feeling now, arter your exercise with the pitchfork, sir?"
"Very fit, I thank you, Adam. Sit down and smoke, and let us converse together."
"Why, thankee, sir,"
answered Adam, producing the small black clay pipe from his waistcoat pocket, and accepting Bellew's proffered pouch.
"I've been up to the 'ouse a visitin' Prudence the cook, and a rare cook she be too, Mr. Bellew, sir."
"And a rare buxom girl into the bargain, Adam."
"Oh, ah! Well, she's well enough, sir, I won't go for to deny as she's a fine, upstanding, well shaped, tall, and proper figure of a woman as ever was, sir, though the Kentish lasses be a tidy lot, Mr. Bellew, sir. But Lord! when you come to think of her gift of Yorkshire puddin', likewise jam rollers and seed cakes, which, though mentioned last, ain't by no manner of means least, when you come to think of her brew o' ale, and cider, and ginger wine, why then, I'm took, sir, I'm took altogether, and the old Adam inside o' me works hisself into such a state that if another chap, specially that there Job Jagway, gets looking her way, and too often, why it's got to get took out o' him, or took out o' me in good hard knocks, Mr. Bellew, sir."
"And when are you going to get married, Adam?"
"Well, sir, we was thinking that if Miss Anthea has a good season, this year, we'd get it over and done with some time in October, sir, but it's all accordin'."
"According to what?"
"To the 'ops, sir, the HOPS, 'ops, sir. They're comin' on fine, scrumptious they be. If they don't take the blight, sir, they'll be the finest 'ops this side o' Maidstone, but then, if they do take the blight, why then, my 'opes is blighted, likewise, sir. BLITED, blighted, Mr. Bellew, sir."
Which said, Adam laughed once, nodded his head several times, and relapsed into puffing silence. "Mr. Cassilis was over to day, Adam," said Bellew, after a while pursuing a train of thought. "Ah, sir, I seen him, he also seen me. He told me as Job Jagway was up and about again. Likewise Job Jagway will be over 'ere to morrow, along wi' the rest of 'em, for the sale, sir." "Ah, yes, the sale," said Bellew, thoughtfully.
"To think o' that there Job Jagway a comin' over here to buy Miss Anthea's furnitur' do set the old Adam a workin' inside o' me to that amazin' extent as I can't sit still, Mr. Bellew, sir. And if that there Job crosses my path to morrer, well, let him. Look out, that's all."
Saying which, Adam doubled up a huge, knotted fist, and shook it at an imaginary Job. "Adam," said Bellew in the same thoughtful tone, "I wonder if you would do something for me?"
"Anything you ax me, sir, so long as you don't want me to—"
"I want you to buy some of that furniture for me."
"What?"
exclaimed Adam, and vented his great laugh again.
"Well, if that ain't a good 'un, sir, and it's just what I'm a going to do. Yer see, I ain't what you might call a rich cove, nor yet a millionaire, but I've got a bit put by, and I drawed out £10 yesterday. Thinks I, 'ere's to save Miss Anthea's old sideboard, or the mirror as she's so fond of, or if not, why then a cheer or so. They ain't a going to get it all, not while I've got £1 or two, I says to myself."
"Adam," said Bellew, turning suddenly, "that sentiment does you credit, that sentiment makes me proud to have knocked you into a ditch. Shake hands, Adam." And there, beneath the great apple tree, while the moon looked on, they very solemnly shook hands. "And now, Adam," pursued Bellew, "I want you to put back your £10, keep it for prudence, because I happen to have rather more than we shall want. See here," and with the words, Bellew took out a leathern wallet, and from this wallet, money and bank notes. More money, and more bank notes than Adam had ever beheld in all his 30 odd years, at sight of which his eyes opened, and his square jaw relaxed, to the imminent danger of his cherished clay pipe. "I want you to take this," Bellew went on, counting a sum into Adam's nerveless hand, "and to morrow, when the sale begins, if anyone makes a bid for anything, I want you to bid higher, and, no matter what, you must always buy. Always, you understand."
"But sir, that there old drawing room cabinet wi' the carvings?"
"Buy it."
"And the silver candlesticks, and the 4-post bedstead, and the—"
"Buy 'em, Adam, buy everything. If we haven't enough money, there's plenty more where this came from, only buy, you understand?"
"Oh, yes sir, I understand. How much have you give me?" "Why here's 45, 50, 60. Lord!"
"Put it away, Adam, forget all about it till to morrow, and not a word, mind."
£100!"
gasped Adam.
"Lord! Oh, I won't speak of it, trust me, Mr. Bellew, sir, but to think of me a walking about with £100 in my pocket, Lord! I won't say nothin', but to think of old Adam with £100 in his pocket, ecod! It do seem that comical."
Saying which, Adam buttoned the money into a capacious pocket, slapped it, nodded, and rose.
"Well, sir, I'll be going. There be Miss Anthea in the garden yonder, and if she was to see me now, there's no saying but I should be took a laughin' to think o' this 'ere £100.
"Miss Anthea, where?"
"Coming through the rose garden. She be off to see old Mother Dibbin. They call Mother Dibbin a witch, and now, as she's down with the rheumatics, there ain't nobody to look arter her, 'cept Miss Anthea. She'd a starved afore now if it 'adn't been for Miss Anthea, but Lord love your eyes, and limbs, Mr. Bellew, sir, Miss Anthea don't care if she's a witch, or 50 witches, not she. So, good night, Mr. Bellew, sir, and mum's the word."
Saying which, Adam slapped his pocket again, nodded, winked, and went upon his way. Chapter 10. Money Moon. This recording is in the public domain. The Money Moon, a Romance, by Jeffery Farnol. Chapter 11. Of the Man with the Tiger Mark. It is a moot question as to whether a curl can be more alluring when it glows beneath the fiery kisses of the sun, or shines demurely in the tender radiance of the moon. As Bellow looked at it now, that same small curl that nodded and beckoned to him above Anthea's left ear, he strongly inclined to the latter opinion. "Adam tells me that you are going out, Miss Anthea." "Only as far as Mrs. Dibbin's cottage, just across the meadow." "Adam also informs me that Mrs. Dibbin is a witch."
"People call her so."
"Never in all my days have I seen a genuine old witch, so I'll come with you, if I may?"
"Oh, this is a very gentle old witch, and she is neither humped-back, nor does she ride a broomstick, so I'm afraid you'll be disappointed, Mr. Bellew."
"Then, at least, I can carry your basket, allow me." And so, in his quiet, masterful fashion, he took the basket from her arm, and walked on beside her, through the orchard.
"What a glorious night it is!"
exclaimed Anthea suddenly, drawing a deep breath of the fragrant air.
"Oh, it is good to be alive! In spite of all the cares and worries, life is very sweet."
After this, they walked on some distance in silence, she gazing wistfully upon the beauties of the familiar world about her, while he watched the curl above her ear until she, becoming aware of it all at once, promptly sent it back into retirement, with a quick, deft little pat of her fingers. "I hope," said Bellew at last, "I do sincerely hope that you tucked up my nephew safe in bed, you see."
"Your nephew, indeed!"
"Our nephew, then. I ask, because he tells me that he can't possibly sleep unless you go to tuck him up, and I can quite believe it."
"Do you know, Mr. Bellew, I'm growing quite jealous of you. He can't move a step without you, and he is forever talking and lauding your numberless virtues."
"But then, I'm only an uncle after all, and if he talks of me to you, he talks of you to me, all day long."
"Oh, does he?"
"And, among other things, he told me that I ought to see you when your hair is down, and all about you."
"Oh!"
exclaimed Anthea. "Indeed, our nephew is much luckier than I, because I never had an aunt of my own to come and tuck me up at night, with her hair hanging all about her, like a beautiful cloak. So, you see, I have no boyish recollections to go upon, but I think I can imagine—"
"And what do you think of the Sergeant?"
Anthea enquired, changing the subject abruptly. "I like him so much that I am going to take him at his word, and call upon him at the first opportunity."
"Did Aunt Priscilla tell you that he comes marching along regularly every day, at exactly the same hour?"
"Yes, to see how the peaches are getting on," nodded Bellew.
"For such a very brave soldier he is a dreadful coward," said Anthea, smiling. "It has taken him 5 years to screw up enough courage to tell her that she's uncommonly young for her age, and yet, I think it is just that diffidence that makes him so lovable. And he is so simple, and so gentle in spite of all his war medals. When I am moody, and cross, the very sight of him is enough to put me in humour again."
"He has never spoken to Miss Priscilla?"
"Never, though, of course, she knows, and has done from the very first. I asked him once why he had never told her what it was brought him so regularly to look at the peaches, and he said, in his quick, sharp way, 'Miss Anthea, can't be done, mam, a poor battered old soldier, only one arm, no mam.'"
"I wonder if one could find just such another Sergeant outside Arcadia," said Bellew. "I wonder." Now, they were approaching a stile towards which Bellew had directed his eyes, from time to time, as, for that matter, curiously enough, had Anthea, but to him it seemed that it never would be reached, while to her it seemed that it would be reached much too soon. Therefore, she began to rack her mind trying to remember some gate or any gap in the hedge that should obviate the necessity of climbing it. But, before she could recall any such gate, or gap, they were at the stile, and Bellew, leaping over, had set down the basket, and stretched out his hand to aid her over. But Anthea, tall and lithe, active and vigorous with her outdoor life, and used to such things from her infancy, stood a moment hesitating. To be sure, the stile was rather high, yet she could have vaulted it nearly, if not quite, as easily as Bellow himself, had she been alone. But then, she was not alone. Moreover, be it remembered, this was in Arcadia of a midsummer night. Thus, she hesitated, only a moment, it is true, for, seeing the quizzical look in his eyes that always made her vaguely rebellious, with a quick, light movement, she mounted the stile, and there paused to shake her head in laughing disdain of his outstretched hand. Then, there was the sound of rending cambric, she tripped, and next moment he had caught her in his arms. It was for but a very brief instant that she lay, soft and yielding, in his embrace, yet she was conscious of how strong were the arms that held her so easily, ere they set her down. "I beg your pardon, how awkward I am!" she exclaimed in hot mortification. "No," said Bellew, shaking his head, "it was a nail, you know, a bent and rusty nail, here, under the top bar. Is your dress much torn?" "Oh, that is nothing, thank you." So they went on again, but now they were silent once more, and very naturally, for Anthea was mightily angry, with herself, the stile, Bellew, and everything concerned, while he was thinking of the sudden, warm clasp of her arms, of the alluring fragrance of her hair, and of the shy droop of her lashes as she lay in his embrace. Therefore, as he walked on beside her, saying nothing, within his secret soul he poured benedictions upon the head of that bent and rusty nail. And presently, having turned down a grassy lane, and crossed a small but very noisy brook that chattered impertinences among the stones and chuckled at them slyly from the shadows, they eventually came upon a small, and very lonely, little cottage, bowered in roses and honeysuckle, as are all the cottages hereabouts. But now Anthea paused, looking at Bellew with a dubious brow. "I ought to warn you that Mrs. Dibbin is very old, and sometimes a little queer, and sometimes says very surprising things." "Excellent!" nodded Bellew, holding the little gate open for her, "very right and proper conduct in a witch, and I love surprises above all things." But Anthea still hesitated, while Bellew stood with his hand upon the gate, waiting for her to enter. Now he had left his hat behind him, and, as the moon shone down on his bare head, she could not but notice how bright and yellow was his hair, despite the thick black brows below. "I think I would rather you waited outside, if you don't mind, Mr. Bellew." "You mean that I am to be denied the joy of conversing with a real, live, old witch, and having my fortune told?" He sighed. "Well, if such is your will, so be it," said he obediently, and handed her the basket. "I won't keep you waiting very long, and thank you," she smiled, and, hurrying up the narrow path, she tapped at the cottage door. "Come in! Come in!" cried an old, quavering voice, albeit very sharp and piercing. "That be my own soft dove of a maid, my proud, beautiful white lady. Come in, and bring him wi' you. Him as is so big and strong, him as I've expected so long, the tall, golden man from over seas. Bid him come in, Miss Anthea, that Goody Dibbin's old eyes may look at him at last." Hereupon, at a sign from Anthea, Bellew turned in at the gate, and, striding up the path, entered the cottage. Despite the season, a fire burned upon the hearth, and, crouched over this, in a great elbow chair, sat a very bent and aged woman. Her face was furrowed, and seamed with numberless lines and wrinkles, but her eyes were still bright, and she wore no spectacles. Likewise her white hair was wonderfully thick and abundant, as could plainly be seen beneath the frill of her cap, for, like the very small room of this very small cottage, she was extremely neat and tidy. She had a great, curving nose, and a great curving chin, and what with this and her bright black eyes, and stooping figure, she was very much like what a witch should be, albeit a very superior kind of a witch. She sat, for a while, staring up at Bellew, who stood tall and bareheaded, smiling down at her, and then, all at once, she nodded her head 3 several and distinct times. "Right!" she quavered, "right! Right! It be all right! The golden man as I've watched this many a day, wi' the curly hair, and the sleepy eye, and the tiger mark upon his arm. Right! Right!" "What do you mean by tiger mark?" enquired Bellew. "I mean, young master with your golden curls, I mean as, sitting here day in, and day out, staring down into my fire, I has my dreams. Leastways, I calls 'em my dreams, though there's them as calls it the second sight. But pray sit down, tall sir, on the stool there, and you, my tender maid, my dark lady, come you here, upon my right, and, if you wish, I'll look into the ink, or read your pretty hand, or tell you what I see down there in the fire. But no, first show what you have brought for old Nannie in the blessed basket, the fine, strong basket as holds so much. Yes, set it down here, where I can open it myself, tall sir. Eh, what's this? Oh, tea! Oh, God bless you for the tea, my dear, and eggs, and butter, and a cold chicken. The Lord bless your kind heart, Miss Anthea. Oh, my proud lady, happy the man who shall win ye, happy the man who shall wed ye, my dark, beautiful maid. And strong must he be, aye, and masterful he who shall wake the love light in those dark, great, passionate eyes of yours. And there is no man in all this world can do it, but he must be a golden man, with a tiger mark upon him. Why, oh Nannie! Aye, blush if you will, my dark lady, but Mother Dibbin knows she's seen it in the fire, dreamed it in her dreams, and read it in the ink. The path lies very darker for ye, my lady, aye, very dark it be, and full o' cares, and troubles, but there's the sun shining beyond, bright and golden. You be proud, and high, and scornful, my lady, 'tis in your blood. You need a strong hand to guide ye, and the strong hand shall come. By force you shall be wooed, and by force you shall be wed, and there be no man strong enough to woo and wed ye, but him as I've told ye of, him as bears the tiger mark." "But Nannie," said Anthea again, gently interrupting her, and patting the old woman's shriveled hand, "you're forgetting the basket, you haven't found all we've brought you yet." "Aye, aye," nodded old Nannie, "the fine, strong basket. Let's see what more be in the good, kind basket. Here's bread, and sugar, and—" "A pound of your favourite tobacco," said Anthea with a smiling nod. "Oh, the good weed, the blessed weed!" cried the old woman, clutching the package with trembling fingers. "Ah, who can tell the comfort it has been to me in the long, long days, and the long, long nights, the blessed weed, when I've sat here a-looking and a-looking into the fire. Oh, God bless you, my sweet maid, for your kindly thought!" And, with a sudden gesture, she caught Anthea's hand to her lips, and then, just as suddenly, turned upon Bellew. "And now, tall sir, can I do aught for ye? Shall I look into the fire for ye, or the ink, or read your hand?" "Why yes," answered Bellew, stretching out his hand to her. "You shall tell me 2 things, if you will. First, shall one ever find his way into the Castle of Heart's Desire? And secondly, when? Oh, but I don't need to look into her hand to tell you that, tall sir, nor yet in the ink, or in the fire, for I've dreamed it all in my dreams. And now, see you, 'tis a strong place, this castle, with thick doors, and great locks and bars. But I've seen those doors broke down, those great locks and bars burst asunder. But there is none can do this but him as bears the tiger mark. So much for the first, and for the second. Happiness shall come riding to you on the full moon, but you must reach up, and take it for yourself, if you be tall enough." "And even you are not tall enough to do that, Mr. Bellew," laughed Anthea as she rose to bid old Nannie good night, while Bellew, unnoticed, slipped certain coins upon a corner of the chimney piece. So old Nannie blessed them, and theirs, past, present, and future, thoroughly and completely, with a fine comprehensiveness that only a genuinely accomplished old witch might hope to attain to, and, following them to the door, paused there with one shrivelled, claw like hand uplifted towards the sky. "At the full o' the moon, tall sir!" she repeated, "at the full o' the moon! As for you, my dark eyed lady, I say, by force you shall be wooed, and by force you shall be wed, aye, aye! But there is no man strong enough except he have the tiger mark upon him. Old Nannie knows, she's seen it in the ink, dreamed it in the fire, and read it all in your pretty hand. And now, thank ye for the tea, my pretty, and God bless ye for the good weed, and just so sure as you've been good and kind to old Nannie, so shall fortune be good and kind to you, Miss Anthea." "Poor old Nannie!" said Anthea, as they went on down the grassy lane, "she is so very grateful for so little, and she is such a gentle old creature really, though the country folk do call her a witch, and are afraid of her because they say she has the evil eye, which is ridiculous, of course. But nobody ever goes near her, and she is dreadfully lonely, poor old thing." "And so that is why you come to sit with her, and let her talk to you?" enquired Bellew, staring up at the moon. "Yes." "And do you believe in her dreams, and visions?" "No, of course not," answered Anthea rather hurriedly, and with a deeper colour in her cheeks, though Bellew was still intent upon the moon. "You don't either, do you?" she enquired, seeing he was silent. "Well, I don't quite know," he answered slowly, "but she is rather a wonderful old lady, I think." "Yes, she has wonderful thick hair still," nodded Anthea, "and she's not a bit deaf, and her eyes are as clear and sharp as ever they were." "Yes, but I wasn't meaning her eyes, or her hair, or her hearing." "Oh, then pray what were you pleased to mean?" "Did you happen to notice what she said about a man with a tiger mark?" enquired Bellew, still gazing up at the moon. Anthea laughed. "The man with a tiger mark! Of course! He has been much in her dreams lately, and she has talked of him a great deal." "Has she?" said Bellew. "Ha!" "Yes, her mind is full of strange twists and fancies. You see she is so very old, and she loves to tell me her dreams, and read the future for me." "Though, of course, you don't believe it," said Bellew. "Believe it!" Anthea repeated, and walked some dozen paces or so before she answered, "No, of course not." "Then none of your fortune, nothing she told you, has ever come true?" Once more Anthea hesitated, this time so long that Bellew turned from his moon gazing to look at her. "I mean," he went on,
Has none of it ever come true? About this man with the tiger mark, for instance?"
"No, oh, no!"
answered Anthea rather hastily, and laughed again.
"Old Nannie has seen him in her dreams, everywhere, in India, in Africa, and China, in hot countries, and cold countries. Oh! Nannie has seen him everywhere, but I have seen him nowhere, and, of course, I never shall."
"Ah!" said Bellew. "And she reads him always in your fortune, does she?"
"And I listen very patiently," Anthea nodded, "because it pleases her so much, and it is all so very harmless, after all, isn't it?"
"Yes," answered Bellew, "and very wonderful."
"Wonderful? Poor old Nannie's fancies? What do you mean by wonderful?"
"Upon my word, I hardly know," said Bellew, shaking his head, "but there are more things in heaven and earth, etc., you know, and this is one of them."
"Really? Now you grow mysterious, Mr. Bellew."
"Like the night," he answered, turning to aid her across the impertinent brook that chuckled at them, and laughed after them, as only such a very impertinent brook possibly could. So betimes they reached the stile, and crossed it, this time without mishap, despite the lurking nail, and, all too soon for Bellew, had traversed the orchard, and were come to the garden where the roses all hung so still upon their stems that they might have been asleep, and filling the air with the perfume of their dreams. And here they paused, perhaps because of the witchery of the moon, perhaps to listen to the voice of the nightingale who sang on more gloriously than ever, yet, though they stood so close together, their glances seldom met, and they were very silent. But at last, as though making up her mind, Anthea spoke.
"What did you mean when you said old Nannie's dreams were so wonderful?" she asked.
"I'll show you," he answered, and while he spoke, slipped off his coat, and drawing up his shirt sleeve, held out a muscular, white arm towards her. He held it out in the full radiance of the moon, and thus, looking down at it, her eyes grew suddenly wide, and her breath caught strangely as surprise gave place to something else, for there, plain to be seen upon the white flesh, were 3 long scars that wound up from elbow to shoulder. And so, for a while, they stood thus, she looking at his arm, and he at her.
"Why!" she said at last, finding voice in a little gasp, "why, then—"
"I am the man with the tiger mark," he said, smiling his slow, placid smile. Now, as his eyes looked down into hers, she flushed sudden, and hot, and her glance wavered, and fell beneath his. "Oh!" she cried, and, with the word, turned about, and fled from him into the house. Chapter 11. Money Moon. This recording is in the public domain. The Money Moon, a Romance, by Jeffery Farnol. Chapter 12, in which may be found a full, true, and particular account of the sale.
"Uncle Porges, there's a little man in the hall with a red, red nose, and a blue, blue chin."
"Yes, I've seen him, also his nose, and chin, my Porges."
"But he's sticking little papers with numbers on them, all over my Auntie Anthea's chairs, and tables. Now what do you suppose he's doing that for?"
"Who knows? It's probably all on account of his red nose, and blue chin, my Porges. Anyway, don't worry about him. Let us, rather, find our Auntie Anthea." They found her in the hall, and it was a hall, here at Dappelmere, wide and high, and with a minstrel's gallery at one end. A hall that, years and years ago, had often rung with the clash of men at arms, and echoed with loud and jovial laughter, for this was the most ancient part of the manor. It looked rather bare, and barren just now, for the furniture was all moved out of place,
ranged neatly round the walls, and stacked at the farther end, beneath the gallery where the little man in question, blue of chin and red of nose, was hovering about it, dabbing little tickets on chairs and tables, even as Small Porges had said. And, in the midst of it all, stood Anthea, a desolate figure, Bellew thought, who, upon his entrance, bent her head to draw on her driving gloves, for she was waiting for the dog cart which was to bear her, and Small Porges to Cranbrook, far away from the hollow tap of the auctioneer's hammer. "We're getting rid of some old furniture, you see, Mr. Bellew," she said, laying her hand on an antique cabinet near by. "We really have much more than we ever use." "Yes," said Bellew, but he noticed that her eyes were very dark and wistful, despite her light tone, and that she had laid her hand upon the old cabinet with a touch very like a caress.
"Why is that man's nose so awful red, and his chin so blue, Auntie Anthea?"
enquired Small Porges, in a hissing stage whisper.
"Hush, Georgy, I don't know," said Anthea. "And why is he sticking his little numbers all over our best furniture?"
"That is to guide the auctioneer."
"Where to, and what is an auctioneer?"
But, at this moment, hearing the wheels of the dog cart at the door, Anthea turned, and hastened out into the sunshine.
"A lovely day it do be for driving,"
said Adam, touching his hat, "and Bess be thinking the same, I do believe," and he patted the glossy coat of the mare, who arched her neck, and pawed the gravel with an impatient hoof. Lightly, and nimbly, Anthea swung herself up to the high seat, turning to make Small Porges secure beside her, as Bellew handed him up. "You'll look after things for me, Adam?" said Anthea, glancing back wistfully into the dim recesses of the cool, old hall. "I will that, Miss Anthea." "Mr. Bellew, we can find room for you if you care to come with us." "Thanks," said he, shaking his head, "but I rather think I'll stay here, and help Adam to look after things, if you don't mind." "Then, good bye," said Anthea, and, nodding to Adam, he gave the mare her head, and off they went.
"Good bye!" cried Small Porges, "and thank you for the shilling, Uncle Porges."
"The mare is rather fresh this morning, isn't she, Adam?" inquired Bellew, watching the dog cart's rapid course.
"Fresh, sir?"
"And that's rather a dangerous sort of thing for a woman to drive, isn't it?" "Meaning the dog cart, sir." "Meaning the dog cart, Adam."
"Why, Lord love you,
Mr. Bellew, sir," cried Adam with his great laugh,
there ain't nobody can handle the ribbons better than Miss Anthea. There ain't a horse as she can't drive, or ride, for that matter, not nowheres, sir."
"Hum!" said Bellew, and, having watched the dog cart out of sight, he turned and followed Adam into the stables. And here, sitting upon a bale of hay, they smoked many pipes together in earnest converse, until such time as the sale should begin. As the day advanced, people began arriving in twos and threes, and, among the first, the auctioneer himself. A jovial faced man was this auctioneer, with jovial manner, and a jovial smile. Indeed, his joviality seemed, somehow or other, to have got into the very buttons of his coat, for they fairly winked and twinkled with joviality. Upon catching sight of the furniture, he became, if possible, more jovial than ever, and, beckoning to his assistant, that is to say, to the small man with the red nose and the blue chin, who, it seemed, answered to the name of Theodore, he clapped him jovially upon the back, rather as though he were knocking him down to some unfortunate bidder, and immediately fell into business converse with him, albeit jovial still. But all the while intending purchasers were arriving. They came on horse, and afoot, and in conveyances of every sort and kind, and the tread of their feet, and the buzz of their voices awoke unwonted echoes in the old place. And still they came, from far and near, until some 100 odd people were crowded into the hall. Conspicuous among them was a large man with a fat red neck which he was continually mopping at, and rubbing with a vivid bandana handkerchief scarcely less red. Indeed, red seemed to be his pervading color, for his hair was red, his hands were red, and his face, heavy and round, was reddest of all, out of whose flaming circumference two diminutive but very sharp eyes winked and blinked continually. His voice, like himself, was large, with a peculiar brassy ring to it that penetrated to the farthest corners and recesses of the old hall. He was, beyond all doubt, a man of substance, and of no small importance, for he was greeted deferentially on all hands, and it was to be noticed that people elbowed each other to make way for him, as people ever will before substance, and property. To some of them he nodded, to some he spoke, and with others he even laughed, albeit he was of a solemn, sober, and serious nature, as becomes a man of property, and substance. Between whiles, however, he bestowed his undivided attention upon the furniture. He sat down suddenly, and heavily, in chairs. He pummelled them with his plump, red fists, whereby to test their springs. He opened the doors of cabinets, he peered into drawers, he rapped upon tables, and altogether comported himself as a thoroughly knowing man should, who is not to be hocussed by veneer, or taken in by the shine and splendour of well applied beeswax. Bellew, watching all this from where he sat screened from the throng by a great carved sideboard, and divers chairs, and what nots, drew rather harder at his pipe, and, chancing to catch Adam's eye, beckoned him to approach. "Who is that round, red man yonder, Adam?" he enquired, nodding to where the individual in question was engaged at that moment poking at something or other with a large, sausage like finger. "That," replied Adam in a tone of profound disgust, "that be Mr. Grimes o' Cranbrook, sir. Calls hisself a corn chandler, but I calls him, well, never mind what, sir, only it weren't at corn chandling as he made all his money, sir, and it be him as we all work and slave for, here at Dappelmir farm." "What do you mean, Adam?" "I mean as it be him as holds the mortgage on Dappelmir, sir." "Ah! And how much?" "Over £3,000, Mr. Bellew, sir," sighed Adam, with a hopeless shake of the head, "and that be a powerful lot of money, sir." Bellew thought of the sums he had lavished upon his yacht, upon his 3 racing cars, and certain other extravagances. £3,000, $15,000, it would make her a free woman, independent, happy, just $15,000, and he had thrown away more than that upon a poker game, before now. "Lord!" exclaimed Adam, "the very sight o' that theer Grimes's pig eyes a staring at Miss Anthea's furniture, do make the old Adam rise up in me to that amazing extent, Mr. Bellew, sir. I just look at him a thumping and a pounding at that theer chair." Saying which, Adam turned, and, elbowing his way to where Mr. Grimes was in the act of testing the springs of an easy chair, he promptly, and as though forced by a struggling mob, fell up against Mr. Grimes, and jostled Mr. Grimes, and trod heavily upon the toes of Mr. Grimes, and all with an expression of the most profound unconsciousness and abstraction, which, upon the indignant Corn chandler's loud expostulations, immediately changed to a look of innocent surprise. "Can't you look where you're going, you clumsy fool!" fumed the irate Grimes, redder of neck than ever. "Oh, ax your pardon, Mr. Grimes," said Adam solemnly, "but what with people's legs, and chair legs, and the legs o' tables, not to mention sideboards and cabinets, which, though not 'aving no legs, ain't to be by no manner o' means despised therefore, what with this, and that, and t'other, I am that confined, or, as you might say, confused, I don't know which legs is mine, or yourn, or anybody else's, Mr. Grimes, sir. I make so bold as to ax your pardon all over again, sir." During which speech, Adam contrived, once more, to fall against, to tread upon, and to jostle the highly incensed Mr. Grimes back into the crowd again. Thereafter he became a nemesis to Mr. Grimes, haunting him through the jungle of chairs and tables, pursuing him into distant corners and shady places, where, so sure as the sausage like finger poised itself for an interrogatory poke, or the fat, red fist doubled itself for a spring testing punch,
The innocent seeming Adam would thereupon fall against him from the rear, sideways, or in front. Meanwhile, Bellew sat in his secluded corner, watching the crowd through the blue wreaths of his pipe, but thinking of her who, brave though she was, had nevertheless run away from it all at the last moment. Presently, however, he was aware that the Corn chandler had seated himself on the other side of the chiffonier, puffing and panting with heat, and indignation, where he was presently joined by another individual, a small, rat-eyed man, who bid Mr. Grimes a deferential "Good day."
"That there Adam," puffed the Corn chandler, "that there Adam ought to be throwed out into the stables where he belongs. I never see a man with so much growed to feet and elbers in all my days. He ought to be took," repeated the Corn chandler, "and shook, and throwed out into the yard."
"Yes,"
nodded the other,
"took, and shook, and throwed out, neck and crop, sir. And now, what might you think of the furniture, Mr. Grimes?"
"So so, Parsons," nodded Grimes, "so so."
"Shall you buy?"
"I am a-going," said the Corn chandler, with much deliberation, "I am a-going to take them tapestry cheers, sir, likewise the grandfeyther clock in the corner here, likewise the 4-post bedstead with the carved 'eadboard, and most particular, Parsons, I shall take this here sideboard. There ain't another piece like this in the county as I know of. Solid mahogany, sir, and the carvings," and herewith he gave 2 loud double knocks upon the article of furniture in question. "Oh, I've 'ad my eye on this sideboard for years and years, knowed I'd get it some day, too. The only wonder is, she ain't 'ad to sell up before now."
"Meaning, Miss Anthea, sir?"
"Ah, her! I say as it's a wonder to me, what with the interest on the mortgage I owed on the place, and one thing and another, it's a wonder to me she's kept her head above water so long. But mark me, Parsons, mark me, she'll be selling again soon, and next time it'll be lock, stock, and barrel, Parsons."
"Well, I don't hold with women farmers myself,"
nodded Parsons.
"but as to that cupboard over there, Sheraton, I think, what might you suppose it to be worth, betwixt friends now?"
inquired Parsons, the rat-eyed.
"I can't say I've seed it, and likewise felt it,"
answered the Corn chandler, rising.
"Let me lay my hand upon it, and I'll tell you to a shilling."
And here, they elbowed their way into the crowd. But Bellew sat there, chin in hand, quite oblivious to the fact that his pipe was out, long since. The tall, old grandfather clock, ticking in leisurely fashion in the corner behind him, solemn and sedate as it had done since, as the neat inscription upon the dial testified, it had first been made in the year of grace 1732, by one Jabez Havisham, of London. This ancient time piece now uttered a sudden wheeze, which, considering its great age, could scarcely be wondered at, and thereafter, the wheezing having subsided, gave forth a soft, and mellow chime proclaiming to all and sundry that it was 12 o'clock. Hereupon the Auctioneer, bustling to and fro with his hat upon the back of his head, consulted his watch, nodded to the red-nosed, blue-chinned Theodore, and, perching himself above the crowd, gave 3 sharp knocks with his hammer. "Gentlemen," he began, but here he was interrupted by a loud voice upraised in hot anger.
"Confound you for a clumsy rascal! Will you keep them elbers o' yourn out o' my waistcoat, eh? Will you keep them big feet o' yourn to yourself? If there ain't enough room for you, out you go, d'ye hear? I'll have you took, and shook, and throwed out where you belong. So just mind where you come a-tramping and a-treading."
"Tread?"
repeated Adam. "Lord, where am I to tread? If I steps backwards, I tread on ye; if I steps sideways, I tread on ye; if I steps for'ard, I tread on ye. It do seem to me as I can't go nowhere but there you be a-waiting to be trod on, Mr. Grimes, sir."
Hereupon the Auctioneer rapped louder than ever, upon which the clamour subsiding, he smiled his most jovial smile, and once more began: "Gentlemen, you have all had an opportunity to examine the furniture I am about to dispose of, and as fair minded human beings, I think you will admit that a finer lot of genuine antique was never offered at one and the same time. Gentlemen,
I'm not going to burst forth into laudatory rhodomontade, which is a word, gentlemen, that I employ only among an enlightened community such as I now have the honour of addressing. Neither do I suppose to waste your time in purposeless verbiage, which is another of the same kind, gentlemen. Therefore, without further preface or preamble, we will proceed at once to business. The first lot I have to offer you is a screen, 6 foot high. Bring out the screen, Theodore. There it is, gentlemen. Open it out, Theodore. Observe, gentlemen, it is carved rosewood, the panels hand-painted, and representing shepherds and shepherdesses, disporting themselves under a tree with banjo and guitar. Now, what am I offered for this hand-painted antique screen? Come. 15 shillings, from someone deep hidden in the crowd. Start as low as you like, gentlemen, I am offered a miserable 15 shillings for a genuine, hand-painted 16. This from a long, loose-limbed fellow with a patch over one eye, and another on his cheek. "A pound!" said Adam, promptly. "A guinea!" nodded he of the patches. 25 shillings!" said Adam. "At 25 shillings," cried the Auctioneer, "any advance? A genuine, hand-painted, antique screen, going at 25, at 25, going, gone, to the large gentleman in the neckcloth, Theodore." "There be that Job Jagway, sir," said Adam, leaning across the sideboard to impart this information, "over yonder, Mr. Bellew, sir, 'im as was bidding for the screen, the tall chap wi' the patches. 2 patches be pretty good, but I do wish I'd give 'em a couple more while I was about it, Mr. Bellew, sir." Here the Auctioneer's voice put an end to Adam's self reproaches, and he turned back to the business in hand. "The next lot I'm going to dispose of, gentlemen, is a fine set of 6 chairs with carved antique backs, and upholstered in tapestry, also 2 arm chairs to match. Wheel 'em out, Theodore. Now, what is your price for these 8 fine pieces? Look 'em over, and bid accordingly." 30 shillings! again from the depths of the crowd. "Ha, ha! You joke, sir!" laughed the Auctioneer, rubbing his hands in his most jovial manner. "Oh, you joke! I can't see you, but you joke, of course, and I laugh accordingly. Ha, ha, ha! 30 shillings for 8 fine, antique, tapestried, hand-carved chairs! Oh, very good! Excellent, upon my soul!" £3, said the fiery-necked Corn chandler. "Guineas!" said the rat-eyed Parsons. £4, nodded the Corn chandler. £4.10, roared Adam. 5, nodded Grimes, edging away from Adam's elbow. £6.10, cried Adam. 7, from Parsons. 8, said Grimes. 10, roared Adam, growing desperate. 11, said Grimes, beginning to mop at his neck again. Adam hesitated. £11 seemed so very much for those chairs that he had seen Prudence and the rosy-cheeked maids dust regularly every morning, and then, it was not his money after all. Therefore Adam hesitated, and glanced wistfully towards a certain distant corner. At £11, this fine suite of hand-carved antique chairs, at £11, at 11, going, 15, said a voice from the distant corner, whereupon Adam drew a great sigh of relief, while the Corn chandler contorted himself in his efforts to glare at Bellew round the sideboard. £15, chanted the Auctioneer, "I have 15, I am given 15. Any advance? These 8 antique chairs, going at 15, going, for the last time, going, gone, sold to the gentleman in the corner, behind the sideboard, Theodore."
"They were certainly fine chairs, Mr. Grimes,"
said Parsons, shaking his head. "So, said the Chandler, sitting down heavily, "so, Parsons." And he turned to glare at Bellew, who, lying back in an easy chair with his legs upon another, puffed at his pipe, and regarded all things with a placid interest. It is not intended to record in these pages all the bids that were made as the afternoon advanced, for that would be fatiguing to write, and a weariness to read. Suffice it that lots were put up, and regularly knocked down, but always to Bellew, or Adam; which last, encouraged by Bellew's bold advances, gaily roared down, and constantly outbid all competitors with such unhesitating pertinacity that murmurs rose, and swelled into open complaint, in the midst of which, the fiery visaged Corn chandler, purple now between heat and vexation, loudly demanded that he laid down some substantial deposit upon what he had already purchased, failing which, he should, there and then, be took and shook and throwed out into the yard.
"Neck and crop!"
added Mr. Parsons. "That seems to be a fair proposition," smiled the Auctioneer, who had already experienced some doubts as to Adam's financial capabilities, yet, with his joviality all unruffled, "that seems to be a very fair proposal indeed, if the gentleman will put down some substantial deposit, now?" "Aye, for sure!" nodded Adam, stepping forward, and, unbuttoning a capacious pocket, he drew out a handful of bank notes. "Shall I give ye £100, or will 50 be enough?"
"Why," said the Auctioneer, rubbing his hands as he eyed the fistful of bank notes, "£10 will be all that is necessary, sir, just to ensure good faith, you understand." Hereupon Bellew, beckoning to Adam, handed him a like amount which was duly deposited with the Auctioneer. So, once more, the bidding began, once more lots were put up, and knocked down, now to Adam, and now to Bellew. The bed with the carved headboard had fallen to Adam after a lively contest between him, and Parsons, and the Corn chandler, which had left the latter in a state of perspiring profanity, from which he was by no means recovered, when the Auctioneer once more rapped for silence. "And now, gentlemen, last but by no means least, we come to the gem of the sale, a sideboard, gentlemen, a magnificent mahogany sideboard, being a superb example of the carver's art. Here is a sideboard, gentlemen, which, if it can be equalled, cannot be excelled. No, gentlemen, not if you were to search all the baronial halls, and lordly mansions in this land of mansions, and baronials. It is a truly magnificent piece, in perfect condition, and to be sold at your own price. I say no more. Gentlemen, how much for this magnificent mahogany piece?" £10. 11. 15. 17, said Adam, who was rapidly drawing near the end of his resources. 18. This from Job Jagway. "Go easy there, Job," hissed Adam, edging a little nearer to him. "Go easy now. 19. 20, said Job. 21, roared Adam, making his last bid, and then, turning, he hissed in Job's unwilling ear. "Go any higher, and I'll pound ye into a jelly, Job."
25,
said Parsons.
27. 28. 30, nodded Grimes, scowling at Adam.
32,
cried Parsons.
36.
37.
40, nodded Grimes.
"That drops me,"
said Parsons, sighing and shaking his head.
"Ah!" chuckled the Corn chandler. "Well, I've waited years for that sideboard, Parsons, and I ain't going to let you take it away from me, nor nobody else, sir."
"At 40," cried the Auctioneer, "at 40, this 1, nodded Bellew, beginning to fill his pipe. 41's the bid. I have 41 from the gent in the corner."
45,
growled the Corn chandler. 6, said Bellew.
50,
snarled Grimes. 1, said Bellew. "Gent in the corner gives me 51, chanted the Auctioneer. "Any advance?" "At 51,
55,
said Grimes, beginning to mop at his neck harder than ever. "Add 10, nodded Bellew.
"What's that?"
cried Grimes, wheeling about. "Gent in the corner offers me 65, at 65, this magnificent piece at 65.
What, are you all done? At 65, and cheap at the price! Come, gentlemen, take your time, give it another look over, and bid accordingly." The crowd had dwindled rapidly during the last hour, which was scarcely to be wondered at, seeing that they were constantly outbid either by a hoarse voiced, square shouldered fellow in a neckcloth, or a dreamy individual who lolled in a corner and puffed at a pipe. But now, as Grimes, his red cheeks puffed out, his little eyes snapping in a way that many knew meant danger, with a large D, as the rich Corn chandler, whose word was law to a good many, turned and confronted this lounging, long legged individual, such as remained closed round them in a ring, in keen expectation of what was to follow. Observing which, the Corn chandler, feeling it incumbent upon him now or never to vindicate himself as a man of property and substance, and not to be put down, thrust his hands deep into his pockets, spread his legs wide apart, and stared at Bellew in a way that most people had found highly disconcerting, before now. Bellew, however, seemed wholly unaffected, and went on imperturbably filling his pipe. "At 65!" cried the Auctioneer, leaning towards Grimes with his hammer poised, "at 65, will you make it another pound, sir? Come, what do you say?" "I say no, sir," returned the Corn chandler, slowly and impressively. "I say no, sir! I say make it another £20, sir!" Hereupon heads were shaken, or nodded, and there rose the sudden shuffle of feet as the crowd closed in nearer. "I get 85! Any advance on 85?" "86!" said Bellew, settling the tobacco in his pipe bowl with his thumb. Once again the Auctioneer leaned over and appealed to the Corn chandler, who stood in the same attitude, jingling the money in his pocket. "Come, sir, don't let a pound or two stand between you and a sideboard that can't be matched in the length and breadth of the United Kingdom. Come, what do you say to another 10 shillings?" "I say, sir," said Grimes, with his gaze still riveted upon Bellew, "I say no, sir. I say
"Make it another £20, sir!"
Again there rose the shuffle of feet, again heads were nodded, and elbows nudged neighbouring ribs, and all eyes were focused upon Bellew who was in the act of lighting his pipe. £106!" cried the Auctioneer, "at 1/6! At 1/6!" Bellew struck a match, but the wind from the open casement behind him extinguished it. "I have £106! Is there any advance? Yes or no? Going at 106!" Adam, who up till now had enjoyed the struggle to the utmost, experienced a sudden qualm of fear. Bellew struck another match. "At £106! At 1/6! Going at £106!" A cold moisture started out on Adam's brow. He clenched his hands, and muttered between his teeth. Supposing the money were all gone, like his own share, supposing they had to lose this famous old sideboard, and to Grimes of all people! This, and much more, was in Adam's mind while the Auctioneer held his hammer poised, and Bellew went on lighting his pipe. "Going at 106! Going! 50 up!" said Bellew. His pipe was well alight at last, and he was nodding to the Auctioneer through a fragrant cloud. "What?" cried Grimes. "'Ow much?" "Gent in the corner gives me £156!" said the Auctioneer, with a jovial eye upon the Corn chandler's lowering visage. "156! All done? Any advance? Going at 156! Going! Gone!" The hammer fell, and, with its tap, a sudden silence came upon the old hall. Then, all at once, the Corn chandler turned, caught up his hat, clapped it on, shook a fat fist at Bellew, and, crossing to the door, lumbered away, muttering maledictions as he went. By twos and threes the others followed him, until there remained only Adam,
Bellew, the auctioneer, and the red-nosed Theodore. And yet there was one other, for, chancing to raise his eyes to the minstrel's gallery, Bellew espied Miss Priscilla, who, meeting his smiling glance, leaned down suddenly over the carved rail, and very deliberately threw him a kiss, and then hurried away with a quick, light tap tap of her stick. Chapter 12. Of the Money Moon. This recording is in the public domain. The Money Moon, a Romance, by Jeffery Farnol. Chapter 13. How Anthea Came Home.
"Lord!" said Adam, pausing with a chair under either arm, "Lord, Mr. Bellew, sir, I wonder what Miss Anthea will say."
With which remark, he strode off with the 2 chairs to set them in their accustomed places. Seldom indeed had the old hall, despite its many years, seen such a running to and fro, heard such a patter of flying feet, such merry voices, such gay and heartfelt laughter. For here was Miss Priscilla, looking smaller than ever, in a great arm chair whence she directed the disposal and arrangement of all things, with quick little motions of her crutch stick. And here were the 2 rosy cheeked maids, brighter and rosier than ever, and here was comely Prudence, hither come from her kitchen to bear a hand, and here, as has been said, was Adam, and here also was Bellew, his pipe laid aside with his coat, pushing and tugging in his efforts to get the great sideboard back into its customary position. And all, as has also been said, was laughter and bustle, and an eager haste to have all things as they were, and should be henceforth, before Anthea's return.
"Lord!"
exclaimed Adam again, balanced now upon a ladder, and pausing to wipe his brow with one hand, and with a picture swinging in the other,
"Lord! Whatever will Miss Anthea say, Mr. Bellew, sir?"
"Ah!" nodded Bellew thoughtfully, "I wonder.
What do you suppose she'll say, Miss Priscilla, mam?"
"I think you'd better be careful of that picture, Adam."
"Which means," said Bellew, smiling down into Miss Priscilla's young, bright eyes, "that you don't know."
"Well, Mr. Bellew, she'll be very glad, of course, happier, I think, than you or I can guess, because I know she loves every stick and stave of that old furniture, but
" "But," nodded Bellew, "yes, I understand."
Mr. Bellew, if Anthea, oh God bless her dear heart, but if she has a fault, it is pride, Mr. Bellew, pride, 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 with a capital P."
"Yes, she is very proud."
"She'll be that happy-hearted,"
said Adam, pausing near by with a great armful of miscellaneous articles,
"and that full o' joy as never was, Mr. Bellew, sir."
Having delivered himself of which, he departed with his load.
"I rose this morning very early, Mr. Bellew, oh, very early,"
said Miss Priscilla, following Adam's laden figure with watchful eyes. "Couldn't possibly sleep, you see, so I got up, ridiculously early, but bless you, she was before me."
"Ah!" "Oh dear, yes, had been up hours, and what do you suppose she was doing?"
Bellew shook his head.
"She was rubbing and polishing that old sideboard that you paid such a dreadful price for, down on her knees before it, yes she was, and polishing, and rubbing, and crying all the while. Oh dear heart, such great big tears, and so very quiet. When she heard my little stick come tapping along, she tried to hide them, I mean her tears, of course, Mr. Bellew, and when I drew her dear, beautiful head down into my arms, she tried to smile. 'I'm so very silly, Aunt Priscilla,' she said, crying more than ever, 'but it is so hard to let the old things be taken away. You see, I do love them so. I tell you all this, Mr. Bellew, because I like you, ever since you took the trouble to pick up a ball of worsted, for a poor, old, lame woman, in an orchard, first impressions, you know, and secondly, I tell you all this to explain to you why I
Threw a kiss from a minstrel's gallery to a most unworthy individual, Aunt Priscilla? Threw you a kiss, Mr. Bellew, I had to, the sideboard, you know, on her knees, you understand?" "I understand." "You see, Mr. Bellew, sir," said Adam at this juncture, speaking from beneath an inlaid table which he held balanced upon his head, "it ain't as if this was just ordinary furniture, sir. You see, she kinder feels as it be all part o' Dappelmir Manor, as it used to be called, it's all been here so long, that them cheers and tables has come to be part o' the 'ouse, sir. So when she comes, and finds as it ain't all been took, or as you might say, vanished away, why, the question as I asks you is, what will she say? Oh Lord!" And here, Adam gave vent to his great laugh which necessitated an almost superhuman exertion of strength to keep the table from slipping from his precarious perch. Whereupon Miss Priscilla screamed, a very small scream like herself, and Prudence scolded, and the two rosy cheeked maids tittered, and Adam went chuckling upon his way. And when the hall was, once more, its old, familiar, comfortable self, when the floor had been swept of its litter, and every trace of the sale removed, then Miss Priscilla sighed, and Bellew put on his coat.
"When do you expect she will come home?"
he inquired, glancing at the grandfather clock in the corner. "Well, if she drove straight back from Cranbrook, she would be here now, but I fancy she won't be so very anxious to get home to day, and may come the longest way round. Yes, it's in my mind she will keep away from Dappelmere as long as ever she can." "And I think," said Bellew, "yes, I think I'll take a walk. I'll go and call upon the Sergeant." "The Sergeant!" said Miss Priscilla, "let me see, it is now 5:45, it should take you about 15 minutes to the village, that will make it exactly 6 o'clock. You will find the Sergeant just sitting down in the chair on the left hand side of the fireplace, in the corner, at the King's Head, you know. Not that I have ever seen him there, good gracious, no, but I happen to be acquainted with his habits, and he is as regular and precise as his great big silver watch, and that is the most precise and regular thing in all the world. I am glad you are going," she went on, "because to day is, well, a day apart, Mr. Bellew. You will find the Sergeant at the King's Head, until 7:30. "Then I will go to the King's Head," said Bellew. "And what message do you send him?" "None," said Miss Priscilla, laughing, and shaking her head. At least, you can tell him, if you wish, that the peaches are riper than ever they were this evening." "I won't forget," said Bellew, smiling, and went out into the sunshine. But, crossing the yard, he was met by Adam, who, chuckling still, paused to touch his hat. "To look at that theer 'all, sir, you wouldn't never know as there'd ever been any sale at all."
"Not no'ow."
"Now the only question is, were it's me, and as I'm a axin' of myself constant is, what will Miss Anthea 'ave to say about it?" "Yes," said Bellew, "I wonder." And so he turned, and went slowly across the fields. Miss Priscilla had been right. Anthea was coming back the longest way round. Also, she was anxious to keep away from Dappelmere as long as possible. Therefore, despite Small Porges' exhortations, and Bess's champing impatience, she held the mare in, permitting her only the slowest of paces, which was a most unusual thing for Anthea to do. For the most part, too, she drove in silence, seemingly deaf to Small Porges' flow of talk, which was also very unlike in her. But before her eyes were visions of her dismantled home, in her ears was the roar of voices clamouring for her cherished possessions, a sickening roar, broken, now and then, by the hollow tap of the auctioneer's cruel hammer. And each time the clamouring voices rose, she shivered, and every blow of the cruel hammer seemed to fall upon her quivering heart. Thus she was unwontedly deaf and unresponsive to Small Porges,
who presently fell into a profound gloom in consequence. And thus she held in the eager mare who therefore shied, and fidgeted, and tossed her head indignantly. But slowly as they went, they came within sight of the house at last, with its quaint gables and many latticed windows, and the blue smoke curling up from its twisted chimneys, smiling and placid as though, in all this great world, there were no such thing to be found as an auctioneer's hammer. And presently they swung into the drive, and drew up in the courtyard, and there was Adam waiting to take the mare's head, Adam as good-natured and stolid as though there were no abominations called, for want of a worse name, sales. Very slowly, for her, Anthea climbed down from the high dog cart, aiding Small Porges to earth, and with his hand clasped tight in hers, and with lips set firm, she turned and entered the hall. But upon the threshold she stopped, and stood there utterly still, gazing, and gazing upon the trim orderliness of everything. Then, seeing every well-remembered thing in its appointed place, all became suddenly blurred, and dim, and, snatching her hand from Small Porges's clasp, she uttered a great, choking sob, and covered her face. But Small Porges had seen, and stood aghast, and Miss Priscilla had seen, and now hurried forward with a quick tap tap of her stick. As she came, Anthea raised her head, and looked for one who should have been there but was not. And in that moment, instinctively she knew how things came to be as they were, and because of this knowledge, her cheeks flamed with a swift burning colour, and with a soft cry, she hid her face in Miss Priscilla's gentle bosom. Then, while her face was yet hidden there, she whispered: "Tell me all about it." But meanwhile, Bellew, striding far away across the meadows, seeming to watch the glory of the sunset, and to hearken to a blackbird piping from the dim seclusion of the copse a melodious good bye to the dying day, yet saw, and heard it not at all, for his mind was still occupied with Adam's question: what would Miss Anthea say? Chapter 13. Of the Money Moon. This recording is in the public domain. The Money Moon, a Romance, by Jeffery Farnol. Chapter 14, which, among other things, has to do with shrimps, muffins, and tin whistles. A typical Kentish village is Dappelmir, with its rows of scattered cottages bowered in roses and honeysuckle, white-walled cottages with steep pitched roofs, and small latticed windows that seem to stare at all and sundry like so many winking eyes. There is an air redolent of ripening fruit, and hops, for Dappelmir is a place of orchards, and hop gardens, and rick yards, while, here and there, the sharp-pointed, red-tiled roof of some oast house pierces the green. Though Dappelmere village is but a very small place indeed, nowadays, yet it possesses a church, grey and ancient, whose massive Norman tower looks down upon gable and chimney, upon roof of thatch and roof of tile, like some benignant giant keeping watch above them all. Near by, of course, is the inn, a great, rambling, comfortable place, with time-worn settles beside the door, and with a mighty sign a-swinging before it, upon which, plainly to be seen, when the sun catches it fairly, is that which purports to be a likeness of His Majesty King William the Fourth of glorious memory. But alas! the colours have long since faded, so that now, upon a dull day, it is a moot question whether His Majesty's nose was of the Greek or Roman order, or indeed whether he was blessed with any nose at all. Thus, time and circumstances have united to make a ghost of the likeness, as they have done of the original long since, which, fading yet more and more, will doubtless eventually vanish altogether, like King William himself, and leave but a vague memory behind. Now, before the inn was a small crowd gathered about a trap in which sat two men, one of whom Bellew recognized as the red-necked Corn chandler Grimes, and the other the rat-eyed Parsons. The Corn chandler was mopping violently at his face and neck, down which ran, and to which clung, a foamy substance suspiciously like the froth of beer, and, as he mopped, his loud, brassy voice shook and quavered with passion.
"I tell ye, you shall get out of my cottage," he was saying. "I say you shall quit my cottage at the end of the month, and when I says a thing, I means it. I say you shall get off of my property, you and that beggarly cobbler. I say you shall be throwed out of my cottage, lock, stock, and barrel. I say—" "I wouldn't, Mr. Grimes, leastways, not if I was you," another voice broke in, calm and deliberate. "No, I wouldn't go for to say another word, sir, because if you do say another word, I know a man as will drag you down, and out of that cart, sir. I know a man as will break your whip over your very own back, sir. I know a man as will then take and heave you into the horse pond, sir, and that man is me, Sergeant Appleby, late of the 19th Hussars, sir." The Corn chandler, having removed most of the froth from his head and face, stared down at the straight, alert figure of the big Sergeant, hesitated, glanced at the Sergeant's fist which, though solitary, was large and powerful, scowled at the Sergeant from his polished boots to the crown of his well-brushed hat, which perched upon his close-cropped, grey hair at a ridiculous angle totally impossible to any but an ex-cavalry man, muttered a furious oath, and, snatching his whip, cut viciously at his horse, very much as if that animal had been the Sergeant himself, and, as the trap lurched forward, he shook his fist, and nodded his head. "Out you go, at the end of the month, mind that!" he snarled, and so rattled away down the road, still mopping at his head and neck, until he had fairly mopped himself out of sight. "Well, Sergeant," said Bellew, extending his hand, "how are you?" "Hearty, sir, hearty, I thank you, though, at this precise moment, just a leetle put out, sir. None the less, I know a man as is happy to see you, Mr. Bellew, sir, and that's me, Sergeant Appleby, at your service, sir. My cottage lies down the road yonder, an easy march, if you will step that far. Speaking for my comrade and myself, we shall be proud for you to take tea with us, muffins, sir, shrimps, Mr. Bellew, also a pikelet or two. Not a great feast, but tolerable good rations, sir, and plenty of 'em. What do you say?"
"I say, done, and thank you very much." So, without further parley, the Sergeant saluted divers of the little crowd, and, wheeling sharply, strode along beside Bellew, rather more stiff in the back, and fixed vie than was his wont, and jingling his imaginary spurs rather more loudly than usual.
"You will be wondering at the tantrums of the man Grimes, sir, of his ordering me and my comrade Peterday out of his cottage, sir. I tell you, in 2 words, it's all owing to the sale, up at the farm, sir. You see, Grimes is a great hand at buying things uncommonly cheap, and selling 'em uncommonly dear. To day, it seems, he was disappointed."
"Ah?" said Bellew.
"At exactly 23 minutes to 6, sir," said the Sergeant, consulting his large, silver watch, "I were sitting at my usual corner, beside the chimley, sir, when in comes Grimes, like a thunder cloud, calls for a pint of ale, in a tankard. Tom draws pint, which Tom is the landlord, sir. 'Buy anything at the sale, Mr. Grimes?' says Tom. 'Sale?' says Grimes, 'sale indeed!' and falls a cursing, folk up at the farm, shocking, outrageous, ends by threatening to foreclose mortgage within the month, upon which I raise a protest, upon which he grows abusive, upon which I was forced to pour his ale over him, over which I ran him out into the road, and there it is, you see."
"And he threatened to foreclose the mortgage on Dappelmir farm, did he, Sergeant?"
"Within the month, sir, upon which I warned him. In parlour no place, ladies' private money troubles, gaping crowd, damn it!"
"And so he is turning you out of his cottage?"
"Within the week, sir, but then, beer down the neck, he's rather unpleasant. And here the Sergeant uttered a short laugh, and was immediately grave again. "It isn't," he went on, "it isn't as I mind the inconvenience of moving, sir, though I shall be mighty sorry to leave the old place, still, it isn't that so much as the small corner cupboard, and my bookshelf by the chimley. There never was such a cupboard, sir. There never was a cupboard so well calculated to hold a pair of jack boots, not to mention spurs, highlows, burnishers, shoulder chains, polishing brushes, and a boot jack, as that same small corner cupboard. As for the bookshelf beside the chimney, sir, exactly 3 foot 3, sunk in a recess, height the third button of my coat, capacity 14 books. You couldn't get another book on that shelf, no, not if you tried with a sledge hammer, or a hydraulic engine, which is highly surprising, when you consider that 14 books is the true and exact number of books as I possess."
"Very remarkable!" said Bellew.
"Then again, there's my comrade, Peterday."
The Sergeant pronounced it as though it were all one word.
"Sir, my comrade, Peterday, is a very remarkable man. Most cobblers are. When he's not cobbling, he's reading; when not reading, he's cobbling, or mending clocks, and watches, and betwixt this and that, my comrade has picked up a power of information, though he lost his leg a doing of it, in a gale of wind, off the Cape of Good Hope, for my comrade was a sailor, sir. Consequently, he is a handy man, most sailors are, and makes his own wooden legs, sir. He is also a musician, the tin whistle, sir, and here we are."
Saying which, the Sergeant halted, wheeled, opened a very small gate, and ushered Bellew into a very small garden bright with flowers, beyond which was a very small cottage indeed, through the open door of which there issued a most appetizing odour, accompanied by a whistle, wonderfully clear and sweet, that was rendering Tom Bowling, with many shakes, trills, and astonishing runs. Peterday was busied at the fire with a long toasting fork in his hand, but, on their entrance, breaking off his whistling in the very middle of a note, he sprang nimbly to his feet, or rather his foot, and stood revealed as a short, yet strongly built man, with a face that, in one way, resembled an island in that it was completely surrounded by hair and whisker, but it was, in all respects, a vastly pleasant island to behold, despite the somewhat craggy prominences of chin, and nose, and brow. In other words, it was a pleasing face, notwithstanding the fierce, thick eyebrows which were more than offset by the merry blue eyes, and the broad, humorous mouth below.
"Peterday," said the Sergeant, "Mr. Bellew."
"Glad to see you, sir,"
said the mariner, saluting the visitor with a quick bob of the head, and a backward scrape of the wooden leg.
"You couldn't make port at a better time, sir, and because why? Because the kettle's a biling, sir, the muffins is piping hot, and the shrimps is a laying hove to, waiting to be took aboard, sir."
Saying which, Peterday bobbed his head again, shook his wooden leg again, and turned away to reach another cup and saucer. It was a large room for so small a cottage, and comfortably furnished, with a floor of red tile, and with a grate at one end well raised up from the hearth. Upon the hob a kettle sang murmurously, and on a trivet stood a plate whereon rose a tower of toasted muffins. A round table occupied the middle of the floor, and was spread with a snowy cloth, whereon cups and saucers were arranged, while in the midst stood a great bowl of shrimps. Now, above the mantel piece, that is to say, to the left of it, and fastened to the wall, was a length of rope cunningly tied into what is called a running bowline. Above this, on a shelf specially contrived to hold it, was the model of a full-rigged ship that was, to all appearances, making excellent way of it, with every stitch of canvas set and drawing, alow and aloft. Above this again, was a sextant, and a telescope. Opposite all these, upon the other side of the mantel, were a pair of stirrups, 3 pairs of spurs, 2 cavalry sabres, and a carbine, while between these objects, in the very middle of the chimney, uniting, as it were, the army and the navy, was a portrait of Queen Victoria. Bellew also noticed that each side of the room partook of the same characteristics, one being devoted to things nautical, the other to objects military. All this Bellew noticed while the soldier was brewing the tea, and the sailor was bestowing the last finishing touches to the muffins. "It ain't often as we're honoured with company, sir," said Peterday, as they sat down, "is it, Dick?" "No," answered the Sergeant, handing Bellew the shrimps. "We ain't had company to tea," said Peterday, passing Bellew the muffins. "No, we ain't had company to tea since the last time Miss Anthea and Miss Priscilla honoured us, have we, Dick?" "Honoured us," said the Sergeant, nodding his head approvingly, "is the one and only word for it, Peterday." "And the last time was this day 12 months, sir, because why? Because this day 12 months happened to be Miss Priscilla's birthday. Consequently, to day is her birthday, likewise. Wherefore the muffins, and wherefore the shrimps, sir? For they was this day to have once more graced our board, Mr. Bellew." "Graced our board!" said the Sergeant, nodding his head again. "Graced our board is the only expression for it, Peterday. But they disappointed us, Mr. Bellew, sir, on account of the sail." "Messmate," said Peterday, with a note of concern in his voice, "how's the wind?" "Tolerable, comrade, tolerable." "Then why forget the tea?" "Tea!" said the Sergeant, with a guilty start, "why, so I am. Mr. Bellew, sir, your pardon." And, forthwith, he began to pour out the tea very solemnly, but with less precision of movement than usual, and with abstracted gaze. "The Sergeant tells me you're a musician," said Bellew, as Peterday handed him another muffin. "A musician! Me! Think o' that now! To be sure, I do toot on the tin whistle now and then, sir, such things as the British Grenadiers, and the Girl I Left Behind Me, for my shipmate, and the Bay of Biscay, and a Life on the Ocean Wave for myself. But a musician, Lord! You see, sir," said Peterday, taking advantage of the Sergeant's abstraction, and whispering confidentially behind his muffin, "this messmate o' mine has such a high opinion of my gifts as is fair overpowering, and a tin whistle is only a tin whistle, after all."
"And it is about the only instrument I could ever get the hang of,"
said Bellew.
"Why, do you mean as you play, sir?"
"Hardly that, but I make a good bluff at it."
"Why then, I've got a couple of very good whistles, if you're so minded we might try a duet, sir, arter tea."
"With pleasure," nodded Bellew. But hereupon Peterday, noticing that the Sergeant ate nothing, leaned over and touched him upon the shoulder.
"How's the wind now, shipmate?" he enquired.
"Why, so, Peterday,
"Fairish, fairish,"
said the Sergeant, stirring his tea round and round, and with his gaze fixed upon the opposite wall.
"Then, messmate, why not a muffin, or even an occasional shrimp? Where be your appetite?"
"Peterday," said the Sergeant, beginning to stir his tea faster than ever, and with his eyes still fixed, "consequent upon disparaging remarks having been passed by one Grimes, our landlord, concerning them as should not be mentioned in a inn parlour, or anywhere else, by such as said Grimes, I was compelled to pour a tankard of beer over said Grimes, our landlord, this arternoon, Peterday, at exactly 12 minutes past 6, by my watch, which done, I ran our landlord out into the road, Peterday, say, half a minute later, which would make it precisely 13 minutes after the hour, consequent upon which, comrade, we have received our marching orders."
"What, messmate, is it heave our anchor, you mean?"
"I mean, comrade, that on Saturday next, being the 25th instant, we march out, bag and baggage, horse, foot, and artillery, we evacuate our position, in face of superior force, for good and all, comrade."
"Is that so, shipmate?"
"It's rough on you, Peterday, it's hard on you, I'll admit, but things were said, comrade, relative to business troubles of one as we both respect, Peterday, things were said as called for beer down the neck, and running out into the road, comrade. But it's rough on you, Peterday, seeing as you, like the hussars at Assuan,
was never engaged, so to speak."
"Aye, aye, shipmate, that does catch me. On a back, shipmate?"
"Why, Lord, I'd give £1, £2, or 10, just to have been astern of him with a rope's end, though, come to think of it, I'd ha' preferred a capstan bar." "Peterday," said the Sergeant, removing his gaze from the wall with a jerk, "on the 25th instant we shall be without a roof to cover us, and all my doing, Peterday, what have you to say about it?"
"Say, messmate?
"Why, that you and me, honouring, and respecting two ladies as deserves to be honoured, and respected, ain't going to let such a small thing as this here cottage come betwixt us, and our honouring, and respecting of them two ladies. If, therefore, we are due to quit this anchorage, why then it's all hands to the windlass, with a heave yo ho, and merrily, say I. Messmate, my fist!" Hereupon, with a very jerky movement indeed, the Sergeant reached out his remaining arm, and the soldier and the sailor shook hands very solemnly over the muffins, already vastly diminished in number, with a grip that spoke much. "Peterday, you have lifted a load off my heart. I thank ye, comrade, and spoke like a true soldier. Peterday, the muffins." So now the Sergeant, himself once more, fell to in turn, and they ate, and drank, and laughed, and talked, until the shrimps were all gone, and the muffins were things of the past. And now, declining all Bellew's offers of assistance, the soldier and the sailor began washing, and drying, and putting away their crockery, each in his characteristic manner, the Sergeant very careful and exact, while the sailor juggled cups and saucers with the sure-handed deftness that seems peculiar to nautical fingers. "Yes, Peterday," said the Sergeant, hanging each cup upon its appointed nail, and setting each saucer, solicitously in the space reserved for it, on the small dresser. "Since you have took our marching orders as you have took 'em, I am quite reconciled to parting with these here snug quarters, barring only a bookshelf, and a cupboard." "Cupboard?" returned Peterday with a snort of disdain, "why there never was such a ill contrived, lubberly cupboard as that, in all the world. You can't get at it unless you lay over to port, on account of the clothes press, and then hard a starboard, on account of the dresser, and then, it being in the darkest corner. True, Peterday, but then I'm used to it, and use is everything, as you know. I can lay my hand upon anything, in a minute. Watch me." Saying which, the Sergeant squeezed himself between the press and the dresser, opened the cupboard, and took thence several articles which he named, each in order. "A pair of jack boots, 2 brushes, blacking, and a burnisher." Having set these down, one by one, upon the dresser, he wheeled, and addressed himself to Bellew, as follows: "Mr. Bellew, sir, this evening being the anniversary of a certain event, sir, I will ask you to excuse me, while I make the necessary preparations to honour this anniversary, as is ever my custom." As he ended, he dropped the 2 brushes, the blacking, and the burnisher inside the legs of the boots, picked them up with a sweep of the arm, and, turning short round, strode out into the little garden.
"A fine fellow is Dick, sir,"
nodded Peterday, beginning to fill a long clay pipe.
"Lord, what a sailor he'd ha' made, to be sure, failing which he's as fine a soldier as ever was, or will be, with enough war medals to fill my Sunday hat, sir. When he lost his arm they gave him the V.C. and his discharge, sir. Because why? Because a soldier with one arm ain't any more good than a sailor with one leg, d'ye see? So they tried to discharge Dick, but, Lord love you, they couldn't, sir. Because why? Because Dick were a soldier bred and born, and is as much a soldier to day as ever he was. And always will be, until he goes marching aloft, like poor Tom Bowling, until one as is General of all the armies, and Admiral of all the fleets as ever sailed, shall call the last muster roll, sir. At this present moment, sir," continued the sailor, lighting his pipe with a live coal from the fire, "my messmate is sitting to the leeward of the plum tree outside, a polishing of his jack boots, as don't need polishing, and a burnishing of his spurs, as don't need burnishing. And because why? Because he goes on guard to night, according to custom." "On guard?" repeated Bellew.
I'm afraid I don't understand."
"Of course you don't, sir," chuckled Peterday. "Well then, to night he marches away, in full regimentals, sir, to mount guard, and where do you suppose? Why, I'll tell you, under Miss Priscilla's window. He gets there as the clock is striking 11, and there he stays, a marching to and fro until 12 o'clock, which does him a world of good, sir, and no ways displeases Miss Priscilla, because why? Because she don't know nothing whatever about it."
Hereupon Peterday rose, and crossing to a battered seaman's chest in the corner, came back with 3 or 4 tin whistles which he handed to Bellew, who laid aside his pipe, and having selected one, ran tentatively up and down the scale while Peterday listened attentive of ear, and beaming of face.
"Sir," said he, "what do you say to Annie Laurie as a start? Shall we give him Annie Laurie? Very good. Ready? Go!"
Thus, George Bellew, American citizen, and millionaire, piped away on a tin whistle with all the gusto in the world, introducing little trills and flourishes, here and there, that fairly won the one legged sailor's heart. They had already "given 'em" 3 or 4 selections, each of which had been vociferously encored by Peterday, or Bellew, and had just finished an impassioned rendering of "Suwanee River," when the Sergeant appeared with his boots beneath his arm.
"Shipmate," cried Peterday, flourishing his whistle, "did you ever hear a tin whistle better played or mellower in tone?"
"Miller is the only word for it, comrade, and your playing, sirs, is artistic, though doleful. Perhaps you wouldn't mind giving us something brighter, a rattling quickstep. Perhaps you might remember one as begins: 'Some talk of Alexander, and some of Hercules,' if it wouldn't be troubling you too much." Forthwith they burst forth into the British Grenadiers, and never did tin whistles render the famous old tune with more fire and dash. As the stirring notes rang out, the Sergeant, standing upon the hearth, seemed to grow taller, his broad chest expanded, his eyes glowed, a flush crept into his cheek, and the whole man thrilled to the music as he had done, many a time and oft, in years gone by. As the last notes died away, he glanced down at the empty sleeve pinned across his breast, shook his head, and thinking them in a very gruff voice indeed, turned on his heel, and busied himself at his little cupboard. Peterday now rose, and set a jug together with 3 glasses upon the table, also spoons, and a lemon, keeping his weather eye, meanwhile, upon the kettle, which last, condescending to boil obligingly, he rapped 3 times with his wooden leg. "Right oh, Shipmate!" he cried, very much as though he had been hailing the maintop, whereupon the Sergeant emerged from between the clothes press and the dresser, with a black bottle in his hand, which he passed over to Peterday who set about brewing what he called a "jorum o' grog," the savour of which filled the place with a right pleasant fragrance. And, when the glasses brimmed, each with a slice of lemon atop, the Sergeant solemnly rose. "Mr. Bellew, and comrade," said he, lifting his glass, "I give you Miss Priscilla."
"God bless her!"
said Peterday. "Amen!" added Bellew.
So the toast was drunk, the glasses were emptied, refilled, and emptied again,
This time more slowly,
and the clock striking 9,
Bellew rose to take his leave, seeing which, the Sergeant fetched his hat and stick, and volunteered to accompany him a little way. So, when Bellew had shaken the sailor's honest hand, they set out together. "Sergeant," said Bellew, after they had walked some distance, "I have a message for you."
"For me, sir?"
"From Miss Priscilla."
"From indeed, sir?"
"She bid me tell you that the peaches are riper to night than ever they were." The Sergeant seemed to find in this a subject for profound thought, and he strode on beside Bellew very silently, and with his eyes straight before him.
"That the peaches were riper, to night, than ever they were?" said he at last.
"Yes, Sergeant."
"Riper?" said the Sergeant, as though turning this over in his mind.
"Riper than ever they were," nodded Bellew.
"The peaches, I think, sir."
"The peaches, yes."
Bellew heard the Sergeant's finger rasping to and fro, across his shaven chin.
"Mr. Bellew, sir, She is a very remarkable woman, sir." "Yes, Sergeant." "A wonderful woman." "Yes, Sergeant." "The kind of woman that improves with age, sir." "Yes, Sergeant." "Talking of Peaches, sir, I've often thought that she is very like a peach, herself, sir." "Very, Sergeant, but " "Well, sir?" "Peaches do not improve with age, Sergeant, and the peaches are riper than ever they were, to night." The Sergeant stopped short, and stared at Bellew wide eyed. "Why, sir," said he very slowly, "you don't mean to say you think as she meant that " "But I do," nodded Bellew. And now, just as suddenly as he had stopped, the Sergeant turned, and went on again. "Lord!" he whispered, "Lord, Lord!" The moon was rising, and, looking at the Sergeant, Bellew saw that there was a wonderful light in his face, yet a light that was not of the moon. "Sergeant," said Bellew, laying a hand upon his shoulder, "why don't you speak to her?" "Speak to her? What, me? No, no, Mr. Bellew," said the Sergeant, hastily, "no, no, can't be done, sir, not to be mentioned, or thought of, sir." The light was all gone out of his face now, and he walked with his chin on his breast. "The surprising thing to me, Sergeant, is that you have never thought of putting your fortune to the test, and speaking your mind to her, before now." "Thought of it, sir?" repeated the Sergeant bitterly, "thought of it? Lord, sir! I've thought of it these 5 years, and more. I've thought of it, day and night. I've thought of it so very much that I know I never can speak my mind to her. Look at me!" he cried suddenly, wheeling and confronting Bellew, but not at all like his bold, erect, soldierly self. "Yes, look at me! A poor, battered old soldier, with his best arm gone, left behind him in India, and with nothing in the world but his old uniform, getting very frayed and worn, like himself, sir. A pair of jack boots, likewise, very much worn, though wonderfully patched here and there, by my good comrade Peterday, a handful of medals, and a very modest pension. Look at me, with the best of my days behind me, and wi' only one arm left, and I'm a deal more awkward and helpless with that one arm than you'd think, sir. Look at me, and then tell me how could such a man dare to speak his mind to such a woman? What right has such a man to even think of speaking his mind to such a woman, when there's part of that man already in the grave? Why, no right, sir, none in the world. Poverty, and one arm, are facts as make it impossible for that man to ever speak his mind. And, sir, that man never will, sir. Good night to you, and a pleasant walk. I turn back here." Which the Sergeant did, then and there, wheeling sharp right about face, yet, as Bellew watched him go, he noticed that the soldier's step was heavy, and slow, and it seemed that, for once, the Sergeant had even forgotten to put on his imaginary spurs. Chapter 14. Of the Money Moon. This recording is in the public domain. The Money Moon, a Romance, by Jeffery Farnol. Chapter 15, in which Adam explains. "Adam?" "Yes, Miss Anthea." "How much money did Mr. Bellew give you to buy the furniture?" Miss Anthea was sitting in her great elbow chair, leaning forward with her chin in her hand, looking at him in the way which always seemed to Adam as though she could see into the very most recesses of his mind. Therefore Adam twisted his hat in his hands, and stared at the ceiling, and the floor, and the table before Miss Anthea, and the wall behind Miss Anthea, anywhere but at Miss Anthea. "You ax me how much it were, Miss Anthea?"
"Yes, Adam."
"Well, it were a goodish sum."
"Was it £50?"
£50!" repeated Adam, in a tone of lofty disdain. "No, Miss Anthea, it were not £50."
"Do you mean it was more?"
"Ah!" nodded Adam, "I mean as it were a sight more. If you was to take the £50 you mention, add 20 more, and then another 20 to that, and then come to 10 more to that, why, then, you'd be a bit nigher the figure."
£100!
exclaimed Anthea, aghast. "Ah, £100!" nodded Adam, rolling the words upon his tongue with great gusto. £100 were the sum, Miss Anthea."
"Oh, Adam!"
"Lord love you, Miss Anthea, that were nothing, that were only a flea bite, as you might say. He give more, nigh double as much as that for the sideboard."
"Nonsense, Adam!"
"It be gospel true, Miss Anthea. That there sideboard were the plum o' the sale, so to speak, and old Grimes had set his heart on it, d'ye see. Well, it were bid up to £86, and then, old Grimes 'e goes 20 more, making it 106. Then, just as I thought it were all over, and just as that there old Grimes were beginning to swell hisself up with triumph, and get that red in the face as he were a sight to behold, Mr. Bellow, who'd been lightin' his pipe all this time, up and says, '50 up,' 'e says in his quiet way, making it £156, Miss Anthea, which were too much for Grimes, Lord! I thought as that there man were going to burst, Miss Anthea." And Adam gave vent to his great laugh at the mere recollection. But Anthea was grave enough, and the troubled look in her eyes quickly sobered him.
£156! she repeated in an awed voice, "but it is awful!"
"Steepish!" admitted Adam, "pretty steepish for an old sideboard, I'll allow, Miss Anthea, but you see it were a personal matter betwixt Grimes and Mr. Bellew. I began to think as they never would ha' left off biddin', and, by George, I don't believe as Mr. Bellew ever would have left off biddin'. You see, there's something about that Mr. Bellew, whether it be his voice, or his eye, or his chin, I don't know, but there be something about him as says, very distinct, that if so be 'e should 'appen to set 'is mind on a thing, why 'e's a going to get it, and 'e ain't a going to give in till 'e do get it. You see, Miss Anthea, 'e's so very quiet in 'is ways, and speaks so soft and gentle. P'r'aps that's it. Say, for instance, 'e were to ax you for something, and you said 'no,' well, 'e wouldn't make no fuss about it, not 'im, 'e'd just take it, that's what 'e'd do. As for that there sideboard, he'd ha' sat there a bidding and a bidding all night, I do believe."
"But, Adam, why did he do it? Why did he buy all that furniture?"
"Well, to keep it from being took away, p'r'aps."
"Oh, Adam, what am I to do?"
"Do, Miss Anthea?"
"The mortgage must be paid off, dreadfully soon, you know that, and I can't oh, I can't give the money back."
"Why, give it back? No, of course not, Miss Anthea."
"But I can't keep it."
"Can't keep it, Miss Anthea, ma'am, and why not?"
"Because I'm very sure he doesn't want all those things. The idea is quite absurd, and yet, even if the hops do well, the money they bring will hardly be enough by itself, and so I was selling my furniture to make it up, and now, oh, what am I to do?" And she leaned her head wearily upon her hand.
Now, seeing her distress, Adam, all sturdy loyalty that he was, must needs sigh in sympathy, and fell once more to twisting his hat until he had fairly wrung it out of all semblance to its kind, twisting and screwing it between his strong hands as though he would fain wring out of it some solution to the problem that so perplexed his mistress. Then, all at once, the frown vanished from his brow, his grip loosened upon his unfortunate hat, and his eye brightened with a sudden gleam. "Miss Anthea," said he, drawing a step nearer, and lowering his voice mysteriously, "supposin' as I was to tell you that he did want that furniture." "Ah! and wanted it bad?"
"Now how can he, Adam? It isn't as though he lived in England," said Anthea, shaking her head. "His home is thousands of miles away. He is an American, and besides—"
"Ah! but then, even a American may get married, Miss Anthea, mam," said Adam.
"Married?" she repeated, glancing up very quickly. "Adam, what do you mean?"
"Why, you must know," began Adam, wringing at his hat again, "ever since the day I found him asleep in your hay, Miss Anthea, mam, Mr. Bellew has been very kind, and friendly like. Mr. Bellew and me have smoked a good many sociable pipes together, and when men smoke together, Miss Anthea, they likewise talk together."
"Yes, well?" said Anthea, rather breathlessly, and taking up a pencil that happened to be lying near to hand.
"And Mr. Bellew," continued Adam, heavily, "Mr. Bellew has done me the honour," here Adam paused to give an extra twist to his hat, "the honour, Miss Anthea."
"Yes, Adam?"
"Of confiding to me 'is 'opes," said Adam slowly, finding it much harder to frame his well meaning falsehood than he had supposed, "his HOPES 'opes, Miss Anthea, of settling down very soon, and of marrying a fine young lady as he had his eye on a goodish time, 'aving knowed her from childhood's hour, Miss Anthea, and as lives up to Lunnon."
"Yes, Adam?"
"Consequently, he bought all your furniture to set up 'ousekeeping, don't you see?"
"Yes, I see, Adam." Her voice was low, soft, and gentle as ever, but the pencil was tracing meaningless scrawls in her shaking fingers.
"So you don't 'ave to be nowise back'ard about keeping the money, Miss Anthea."
"Oh no, no, of course not, I understand. It was just a business transaction."
"Ah! that's it, a business transaction," nodded Adam. "So you'll put the money a one side to help pay off the mortgage, eh, Miss Anthea?"
"Yes."
"If the 'ops come up to what they promised to come up to, you'll be able to get rid of Old Grimes for good and all, Miss Anthea."
"Yes, Adam."
"An' you'll be quite easy in your mind now, Miss Anthea, about keeping the money?"
"Quite. Thank you, Adam, for telling me. You can go now."
"Why then, good night, Miss Anthea, mam. The mortgage is as good as paid, there ain't no such 'ops nowhere near so good as our'n be. An' you're quite free o' care, and happy 'earted, Miss Anthea?"
"Quite, oh, quite, Adam." But, when Adam's heavy tread had died away, when she was all alone, she behaved rather strangely for one so free of care, and happy hearted. Something bright, and glistening, splashed upon the paper before her, the pencil slipped from her fingers, and with a sudden, choking cry, she swayed forward, and hid her face in her hands. Chapter 15. Of the Money Moon. This recording is in the public domain. The Money Moon, a Romance, by Jeffery Farnol. Chapter 16, in which Adam proposes a game. To be or not to be? Bellow leaned against the mighty bole of King Arthur, and stared up at the moon with knitted brows. That is the question, whether I shall brave the slings and arrows, and things, and speak to-night, and have done with it, one way or another, or live on a while, secure in this uncertainty, to wait, whether I shall, at this so early stage, pit all my chances of happiness against the chances of losing her, and with her, Small Porges, bless him, and all the quaint, and lovable beings of this wonderful Arcadia of mine. For, if her answer be no, what recourse have I? What is there left me but to go wandering forth again, following the wind, and with the gates of Arcadia shut upon me forever? To be or not to be? That is the question.
"Be that you, Mr. Bellew, sir?"
"Even so, Adam, come, sit ye awhile, good knave, and gaze upon Dian's loveliness, and smoke, and let us converse of dead kings."
"Why, kings ain't much in my line, sir, living or dead uns, me never 'aving seen any, except a picter, and that tore, though very lifelike. But why I were a looking for you was to ax you to back me up, and to play the game, Mr. Bellew, sir."
"Why, as to that, my good Adam, my gentle Daphnis, my rugged Euphemio, you may rely on me to the utmost. Are you in trouble? Is it counsel you need, or only money? Fill your pipe, and, while you smoke, confide your cares to me, put me wise, or, as your French cousins would say, make me au fait."
"Well,"
began Adam, when his pipe was well alight,
"in the first place, Mr. Bellew, sir, I begs to remind you, as Miss Anthea sold her furnitur' to raise enough money as, with what the 'ops will bring, might go to pay off the mortgage, for good and all, sir."
"Yes."
"Well, to night, sir, Miss Anthea calls me into the parlour to ax, or as you might say, inquire as to the why, and likewise the wherefore of you a buying all that furnitur'."
"Did she, Adam?"
"Ah! why did 'ee do it?" says she. "Well, to keep it from being took away, p'r'aps," says I, sharp as any gimblet, sir.
"Good!" nodded Bellew.
"Ah! but it weren't no good, sir,"
returned Adam.
"because she says as 'ow your 'ome being in America, you couldn't really need the furnitur', nor yet want the furnitur', and blest if she wasn't talking of handing you the money back again."
"Hum!" said Bellew.
"Seeing which, sir, and because she must have that money if she 'opes to keep the roof of Dappelmir over 'er 'ead, I there and then made up, or as you might say, concocted a story, a anecdote, or a yarn, upon the spot, Mr. Bellew, sir."
"Most excellent Machiavelli, proceed."
"I told her, sir, as you bought that furnitur' on account of you being wishful to settle down, whereat she starts and looks at me with her eyes big and surprised like. I told her, likewise, as you had told me on the quiet, or as you might say, confidential, that you bought that furnitur' to set up 'ousekeeping on account of you being on the p'int o' marrying a fine young lady up to Lunnon."
"What?" Bellew didn't move, nor did he raise his voice. Nevertheless, Adam started back, and instinctively threw up his arm. "You told her that?"
"I did, sir."
"But you knew it was a confounded lie."
"I knowed it, but I'd tell 100, thousands o' lies, confounded or otherwise, to save Miss Anthea."
"To save her?"
"From ruination, sir, from losing Dappelmere Farm, and everything she has in the world. Lord love ye, the 'ops could never bring in by theirselves all the £3000 as is owing, it ain't to be expected, but if that £3000 ain't paid over to that dirty Grimes by next Saturday week as ever was, that dirty Grimes turns Miss Anthea out o' Dappelmere, wi' Master Georgy, and poor little Miss Priscilla, and what'll become of them then? I don't know. Lord, when I think of it, the old Adam do rise up in me to that extent as I'm minded to take a pitchfork, and go and skewer that there Grimes to his own chimbly corner. Ye see, Mr. Bellew, sir," he went on, seeing Bellew was silent still, "Miss Anthea be that proud, and independent that she'd never a took your money, sir, if I hadn't told her that there lie, so that's why I did tell her that there lie."
"I see," nodded Bellew, "I see, yes. You did quite right, you acted for the best, and you did quite right, Adam, yes, quite right."
"Thankee, sir."
"And so, this is the game I am to play, is it?"
"That's it, sir. If she axes you, 'Are you goin' to get married?' you tell her, 'Yes, to a lady as you've knowed from your childhood's hour, living in Lonnon,' that's all, sir."
"That's all, is it, Adam?" said Bellew slowly, turning to look up at the moon again. "It doesn't sound very much, does it? Well, I'll play your game, Adam, yes, you may depend on me."
"Thankee, Mr. Bellew, sir, thankee, sir, though I do 'ope as you'll excuse me for taking such liberties, and making so free with your 'eart, and your affections, sir."
"Oh, certainly, Adam, the cause excuses everything."
"Then, good night, sir."
"Good night, Adam." So, this good, well-meaning Adam strode away, proud on the whole of his night's work, leaving Bellew to frown up at the moon, with teeth clenched tight upon his pipe stem. Chapter 16